Greetings and welcome back. Brought to you by the power of insomnia and time travel. We are here again with Lord Monday, aka Lord Kronos. Unlikely this time it'll go 4 hours, but there were some time paradoxes that Monday experienced due to time travel last time. But nonetheless, I think he'll be able to be in this time sector for a bit. And today's topic is the topic of normies and relatability and what exactly the hell normies are. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because I think the subject of normies is deeply intertwined with relatability and the ability to be socially successful and essentially blend in society. And I think there are a lot of competing definitions for normies. But before I offer my own ideas on that, I will turn over the podium to Lord Kronos. So if I were to ask you for a good definition, Monday, of a normie, how would you define a normie? Just whatever.
Well, when I talk about normies, what I'm talking about is people who experience the general life arc where you go to school, you make friends, maybe somewhere in high school, maybe as late as college, they start dating. Maybe not talking about players, just, regular dating. They have their first kiss probably somewhere in high school. Start having sex somewhere late high school, early college. Then they go out and get regular job. They go out and get a job. They have longer term relationships. At some point in their 20s, maybe early 30s, they get married. Eventually, they have kids. Maybe they get in today's day and age. Maybe they get divorced. Raise their kids, grow old, retire, die, like that kind of basic life arc. Is in the context of my channel is what I'm talking about. Now, I do also sometimes imply things like that they have common interests that we would expect. That's kind of stereotypical of quote unquote normal people. Like if it's a guy, he probably likes sports. If it's a girl, she probably likes shopping and reality shows, TV and movies. And typically, I mean, we might also be able to define them in certain ways by exclusion. For example, they're probably not going to be very interested in sitting down and reading social science papers. They're probably not going to be interested in the kind of topics that come up on a lot of YouTube channels that I'm sure your subscribers watch. They get their news from the regular mainstream news, although that does seem to be changing a little bit with the internet and younger people. And there does seem to be a split between people who get their news and entertainment from the mainstream versus people who get it through the internet. And I don't mean the internet like people on 4chan kind of on the internet, but I just mean people that might use YouTube, like even something relatively tame like the Rubin Report. If you're using those kind of sources, you're going to get a different view of the world than if you just only watch, in America it'd be like, CBS, ABC, MSNBC, CNN. So, a regular normie could be a jock. I'm just using stereotypes here that we don't have to pound out definitions for hours. Could be just one of the regular kids in the school. Doesn't have to be part of a sports team. And even within that, there's probably tiers of normies. I'm not really trying to use a hard definition because for the most part, I think people have a general understanding of what I'm talking about when I talk about, normal people. So there'd probably be a lot of nerds included in this category because, they went to school, they had girlfriends in high school and college and eventually got married. And so it doesn't necessarily, I don't just mean like the popular kids or the popular people in adult life. I'm using just in that kind of broad sense.
Yeah, I think, understandably, pardon me, there are sort of competing definitions, although no one's really gone out of their way to come up with a rigid definition or a precise definition of normie. But it seems to me that depending on the camp, mostly in the internet, these internet communities, you get different ideas of what a normie is. Mm-hmm. I definitely think part of that is people who follow a normal life track where, as you pointed out, they go to school and they
college
hook up
work,
and
yeah.
But I think in the camps I'm familiar with, many different camps, normie has more of a connotation of not being clued into certain things that supposedly Group X is, accepting things at face value, not questioning the status quo,
the narrative,
right? And it varies between groups. So in the manosphere, a normie, I mean, broadly in the manosphere is kind of a huge place these days, but broadly a normie would be somebody who just, things are like women are just kind of like men, except they have, breast scissors and a vajayjay, right?
Right.
But, they're pretty much, people are people, right?
Yeah.
In alt-right circles, not that I'm going to really go into any detail, certain questions are not, normies are the people who don't know what's really going on and who's doing it. In other, I mean, and I've seen other variations of, normies. People don't know about, the bankers and the money printers, and that's the reason for everything. And I think everyone's created their little quadrant of sort of secret knowledge, and normies are people just aren't clued into that. But I think for me, the way I look at normies, I try not to come from the perspective of someone who I guess originally came in the internet context from the manosphere. I would say that relatability is a huge thing. For me, normies are people that just don't share a wide range of interests, and I find them as inaccessible as people as they would me, because my interests admittedly are not, I'm not saying they're better, but they're typically arcane, and most people are. I mean, some of them are so off the wall that you would really need a freak to sit down with me and talk about these things and actually derive pleasure from them. For me, that's how I come at it. And in that sense, looking back on my youth, and I've kind of always been outside of that box. I mean, I've always been a lone wolf with my interests and just the things that tickled my fancy. And most people just didn't give a shit, or at least to the same degree, even when they did. So if you combine all of that with being aware of certain issues that affect society and human beings, you basically just have this huge, almost invisible wall separating your ability to relate to people and their ability to relate to you. And it's a numbers game, of course, because a normative, if you say normativity is essentially the average, what you most often encounter. So there just aren't many people IRL you can talk to. I still have a handful of university friends left over, who most of them are quite quote unquote normal. For an old friend of mine, wife just popped out a kid. I think it was either this month or last month. I've lost track. And any conversation I have with them really goes back to just really basic stuff. Talking about, I don't know. I think there's an expression these days, cake and coffee talk. This thing I've heard recently, and that's what the alt-right calls it. I'm not alt-right.
I haven't heard that expression.
Yeah, sort of, banal, like, how's the missus? Okay. Yeah, work's okay. Occasionally there'll be some political discussion, maybe, but very sort of within normal boundaries of anything. And so that's kind of my experience. I mean, not being clued into stuff, sure, but it's mostly a degree of lack of relatability, and that was what seems to me to be the persistent issue that creates social boundaries. And I think there's also the implication that there's something malicious. Well, people say, well, you just look down. I don't. I just can't relate to most people, and that's always been the case. It affects me even on YouTube. I get so many, and this is a general thing, and you brought this up in your own videos. You've made entire videos about this, so this is an important topic too. So you put out a video, right? And then people are writing comments as if they didn't pay attention to a single word you uttered in that video.
Yes.
Yes. Well, this is I'll make a video. I've never made a video about jaguars and how they hunt caimans in the rainforest. And and some guy starts ranting about, I don't know, hyperinflation. You see, it's complete disconnects. I see this repeatedly, or that happened. I'm kind of gotten used to it. I know, and I think there are a lot of people that have a negative perception of me who just assume that my life course has been identical to them. Even, one thing I can say is I've had a colorful life. I've had a pretty peripatetic existence, i.e., I've moved around a lot. I've lived in 8 different countries. So, I'm not saying there's nothing better or worse here. It's just people willfully try, I find, sometimes not make an effort to understand what you're trying to say or even your perspective. Whereas I've always made an effort, even if I can't directly relate, to try to understand where another person's coming from and try to, whatever kernels of similarity might be there, I'll say, okay, I can kind of, that's another aspect where I think normies just, you mention anything outside of their experience, it's just boxes, they assign people to boxes. And look, I think there's stuff going on there too, you could just sort of evolve the economy of thought and how we evolved, and we can talk about that too, but these are just issues I think that crop up everywhere, and it's really a lot to do with relatability. Can you tell us more about your experience of people, maybe both in real life but also in YouTube, of just, you talk about oranges, right, and they start ranting about, I don't know, fucking spy planes or something, or
Yeah, I actually made a video about this, about replies from normies, but the more I thought about it, I suspect that at least on YouTube, I suspect part of what's going on is that we're dealing with people that would be considered, I would think of as low-tier normies. And what I mean by that is, like, if you have a happy, healthy, functioning life, are you really going to show up on some place like my channel and start trolling me? Are you going to go to places like incel tiers and post making fun of incels? If you've got a full, robust, happy life, you're too busy for that kind of shit. Or if you run across my channel, you might say, wow, it really sucks for this guy. Maybe put some words of condolence in the comment. That'd be about it. So some of these people might superficially have functioning lives in that, they went to school, they went to college, they got a job, they got married, but they're probably really fucking miserable. And for the lack of understanding part, like you said, you talk about jaguars, they're talking about oranges. That I'm not completely sure of exactly like where that's coming from. Like maybe they listened to 2 minutes of it and they latched onto something. And I'll give you an example from there was a video I did. It was a reply to Sargon video about incels, and I double checked to make sure. In the first 39 seconds of that video, and I remember this because I looked up the timestamp because I was replying to someone. I said that I had 2 girlfriends, but being 42 years old and only having 2 girlfriends means something's gone very wrong. And considering the total time between those 2 girlfriends was only about 3 years, I've been single most of my life. So something's gone very wrong. And there was one of the replies said something like, well, if, how do you put it? If all women are rejecting you, obviously you're the problem, or something like that. And I'm like, no, not all women rejected me. And if you watch the video, I wasn't blaming the world for the problems. I was trying to explain it in a very mechanical manner. So he didn't even listen to like the first 39 seconds of what I said. And I've run into that kind of stuff in real life too, not with dating necessarily, but where someone's just not listening at all to what you're saying. And I'm guessing that some of it could be them latching on to a little piece of something you said, or maybe it triggers a memory or an emotional flashback to something else that they've experienced in their life. Now, in a broader sense, like when you're dealing with other people who are otherwise seem to be emotionally stable, intellectually stable, I suspect what's going on with them is they're making assumptions about your life based on what little they know about you sitting in front of them. And they're assuming that you had a certain kind of life, or that you had a life basically like theirs. I think that's what's going on with And then trying to convince them that, no, I didn't have the life that you thought I did, gets to be very frustrating and annoying.
Yeah, and I think so you're sort of mentioning two dimensions to this, and I would agree. In the context of heavily polarized YouTube and the internet, yeah, I think it's people latching on to, they hear there's trigger words. So this has sort of become my classic reference. Some months back, I made a video about Andrew Yang, and I'm somebody who thinks this automation issue is a pretty big issue. Some people are free to disagree with me. And I mentioned offhand, yeah, he supports UBI, for a few minutes. I didn't say I supported UBI. I said I was explaining his platform to people who didn't know about him. And the comment section was just littered with Yang is a communist, Stardust is a communist. It's just, the next form of welfare. Well, one, I wasn't necessarily. I don't know about UBI. There seems to be conflicting evidence depending on the locality in the world, the region, the place. I just don't know. I'm an agnostic. I just don't know. But I wasn't saying UBI is great, and I was mostly talking about, look, this is the only guy talking about automation, and automation is a huge thing. I say this also as somebody who formerly worked in an industry which is slowly but surely being automated, namely translation. It's one of the, I guess you could say, knowledge economy type of things that will be changed or is being changed already. Towards the end of, I don't really do much translation these days, but towards the end of that, I would get jobs sent to me that people, so they get texts or whatever that have been run through translation software, essentially bots, which were imperfect, and then sent to me simply to proofread, for half the cost it would have otherwise been to the person paying me. And that seems to be on the rise, and I suspect in 20, 30 years, the technology level is why bother with humans, just because the economy of it. So, it's an issue I'm aware of. It's interesting intellectually, and how this is, I think, a paradigm shift in contrast to previous times, where you move from horse and buggy to tractor, a little bit different, apples and oranges. But everyone just latched on to, UBI and welfare, and he's a communist, and I'm a communist too. I also have noticed throughout my history that I've been called every political stripe you can imagine. Socialist, communist, libertarian, far right. I don't think I've ever been called far left. Well, maybe once or twice. Because everyone is trying, you talk about, box thinking. Everyone is trying to put you in a box. And if they don't meet something, encounter something that immediately registers with their box, because I do think there's something to do. This has something to do with our, evolved cognition, that simply as a matter of economy, you're living out in the savannah or in some forest environment. You have limited resources. You're trying to survive and reproduce. So it's just economical to put things into categories to understand them quickly. And in a limited environment, most of these categories check out. So as to say, this is this person in my tribe is like this, and this is the category or whatever. So there's that going on with the firmware, but it's also exacerbated by our environment, where there are, certain online communities and groups that do fit certain broad or rough definitions. Pardon me, I'm tired. And so people just think you got to fit into that. Yeah. This happens to me very frequently in my politics, because my politics are pretty complex in the sense that I am a centrist, essentially. And part of me is sort of apolitical. I'm not a sort of, what the Dems are doing in the Senate type of guy. I don't care about that. I care more about sort of, sort of broader macro stuff. And I do think there is power in the middle, so to speak, because I think, generally speaking, the world is too complex for binary models to be offer explanatory power, or primarily. I mean, there's aspects. There are always aspects of truth, even if you go, all the way to one pole or the other. It's just, but people still like to pigeonhole me. And I'll give you an example. So the other day, I was on a politics server, and there's some far-right people there, and the discussion was homosexuality. and I was trying to explain it. There were basically two camps. You had the people on the far left talking about homophobia, which I think is a bunk term, versus the people on the far right who, well, you can imagine what they were saying and thinking. And I kind of intervened because I said, look, I think the evidence suggests this isn't a phobia. It's a disgust reaction,
Yeah.
And there's a
From
distinction
yeah.
because I actually suffer from, I guess, it's mild cynophobia, which is basically fear of dogs. I say it's mild because I've been bitten by aggressive dogs since a child that probably, followed me my whole life. It's not instant. I don't see a dog, but if I see a big dog that's potentially aggressive, so one in the elevator, I just won't get in. Or, I see something like a pit bull heading my way, I'll cross the street, that sort of thing. It's not panic-induced. It's just, but it is a form of cynophobia nonetheless. I'm not disgusted by these animals at all. I'm actually afraid. Now, there's a distinction between that and the feelings that I'd imagine, look, I have nothing against gay people, but I feel it mild the few times I've seen men engage in these activities, and, in online scenarios, and also I do feel a slight disgust reaction. Now, I think that's a matter of degree, because it always
That's how you know
is.
you're not gay.
Right. It's a matter of degree, obviously. But in the case of these guys on the far right, they're utterly disgusted. So then they bring up this thing about, well, would you, march with us against gay pride parades? Well, the first thing is, would you support gay pride? I said, well, not really. I certainly wouldn't spend money on it, and I don't think taxpayer money should be spent on that sort of thing. But you wouldn't support, and if there were alternatives, I would much rather support those, like improving science education or whatever. But you wouldn't sort of on principle. Look, I think if people want to privately fund their own shit and do that, whatever. I don't want to have any part of it. I'm not obsessed with gay rights per se. It just doesn't interest me, and so I'm relatively apathetic. But because simply I'm not as disgusted as they are, and and both of these camps, they just. The homophobia camp, which kept on going back that it's a phobia. It's not. And the others, these guys on the far right, were pigeonholing me, as they said, in my camp. They were accusing me of being far left because I didn't want to, basically make homosexuality illegal. I did mention the case of Alan Turing, which is a tragic one. People always mention exceptions, but, Alan Turing, if I recall, killed himself at age 45 due to undue prejudice expressed against him, and also means that indecency. He had relations with men. For those who don't know, Alan Turing, father of the computer, probably one of the most important minds of the 20th century. He happened to like pee-pee, and that's a good example I would cite of why some level of tolerance. You do want that because you don't want the smartest people alive to off themselves prematurely because they make big contributions. But both these they're saying, the homophobia people saying I was far right because I didn't overtly support gay pride parades, and this is what I'm talking about. So on the internet it's really bad, but of course in real life. Yeah, people are always looking for some sort of common thread, and the less there is of that, the more you're the oddball. So I've actually worked in white collar work and in blue collar work. When I quit my official sort of last office job, I went to work in a warehouse for about 3 years, lugging around heavy shit and putting boxes on shelves. And I had never done that before, honestly. It was a very interesting experience. I learned about different types of people, and they too were, I couldn't relate to their experiences at all, apart from video games maybe, and that tended to be a frequent topic. But even then, and this is going to sound elitist, their angle from video games was completely console-based. Everyone was a console player. It was interesting. Nobody really. Now, I'm not saying PC gaming is the sort of the property of white collar people or people at a. But it was interesting. Everything was the console. They were upset. I think at the time they're releasing the new generation, whatever. And I've never. Last console I played on was '89, whatever. That was an interesting thing. But I do think people operate in boxes because it's just economical. That's how we evolved to make quick decisions about things. But the problem with with billions of people on the planet and massive societies and urban centers is that's really hard to do. But we still do it. And frankly speaking, you look at things like Dunbar's number, this approximate number of about 150 people you could actually get to know well. There's no motivation really. So it's easier to just put people in the boxes. And I mean, I'm not blaming. I have a lot of subs, I think, that try to put me in a box. Also, people who just exclusively see me as I should only talk about MGTOW. That's my Stardust main identity is this guy is going his own way. And then alternatively, you have people you talk about sort of hecklers whose mission is to sort of just either through accusation or otherwise prove that I'm secretly a virgin. I never put my PP in official before, and I think one thing you and I have in common is we've never really in our lives approached people that way, at least outrightly, and that creates, I think, social exclusion too, because if you're not readily putting people in boxes and you want to give people the time of day, and I think that's a normie thing, putting people in boxes, and it feels
I think it also depends on how smart the normal person is, because I suspect they're doing it to reduce cognitive load. Like,
yes.
You're a nerd, you fit into a certain box. You're a jock, you fit into a certain box. And then if they meet someone that is multifaceted and complicated, like they might enjoy watching that kind of character on TV, but dealing with somebody like that in real life is too much cognitive load for them. Although what I've noticed is it seems like people who are kind of at the lower end of intelligence, I don't think they have that problem. And I don't think they have that problem because they're not smart enough to notice the complexity. It seems like it's more people who are kind of mid-range intelligence. Not mid, maybe not mid, maybe like average to a little bit above average, or somewhere in there. I'm not quite sure. It might also depend on other things too, like their personality. Because I've certainly met some people who were not stupid, but for them, like there's only one right way to do things, and they try to put everyone in boxes. And if you don't fit in those boxes, you just confuse them, or they think you're creepy, or something else. Like one of the first things that came up on my channel when I started posting about my dating issues, and I've done a whole series of videos on this, was how there are some people who think that my looks and personality don't match. It first came up with private discussion on Reddit, and then I had people in my comment section posting the same thing independently. There was actually one of my viewers showed one of my videos to a woman that he knew, and she didn't know anything about my channel. She only saw that one video, and I have the recording. It's up on my channel, where she says his personality doesn't match his looks, his face.
Oh, yeah, and you couldn't understand her in an Australian accent saying, he needs to get sorted.
Her.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. And it's funny that she's the one who thinks that I'm the one that has something wrong with him. No, I'm just complicated like human beings are, except apparently I guess most human beings are not very complicated. And, like that throws people off, and they think you're creepy and something's wrong with you, rather than them realizing, no, they're just being dumb. Sorry, it's kind of frustrating. Go ahead.
No, I understand. Well, this kind of speaks to what I talked about last time, sort of substrate, superstrate, where obviously humans are just all complex organisms, but the superstrate, that I guess that appearance, that projection varies a great deal. The thing with me is I kind of made my peace with my inability to relate to people. I've never really related well with most people. I mean, it started, I guess you could say, with the U.S. I mean, there are all sorts of people speculate, sometimes maliciously, why I don't live in the U.S. I just don't really relate to the culture, and we've talked about that, and the people, and it's just not a place for me. And although I certainly have more resonance with in Europe with people, but even there, it's kind of it's lukewarm, and I've just kind of accepted that. I don't get upset about it really. I know I'm the odd man out here. It's not everyone else, too. And it doesn't really bother me. And I think in accepting that, it's quite been pretty helpful in the sense that I've kind of sought people out that at least mesh well with me, although I've yet to find too many people who share my certain interest I have. It's exceedingly difficult because they're just too autistic, I guess, in some cases. But yeah, I remember, I guess in my 20s, I used to kind of get upset about it, but you know, you make your peace with it.
It only bothers me when it has some type of negative impact on my life. You know, like if it's impacting you at work. You know, there was one time on a job where there was a manager who, the first day she met me, there was just something about me she did not like. Now, my coworkers liked me, thank God, and repeatedly defended me against her, but she thought I was some kind of villain and could not be convinced otherwise. Don't know why, could never figure out what that was about. So when it impacts me like that, it bothers me.
Oh, yeah.
You know, but otherwise, yeah, for the most part, you know, okay, whatever. I'll just, you know, I meet someone, they try to put me in a box, doesn't work, they think I'm weird. Okay, I'll move on to the next person, no big deal. It's only when it has bigger, like it's standing in the way of my goals, or in that case, my paycheck, then it'll bother me. But otherwise, yeah, no.
Yeah, I've had, I mean, work-wise, you know, I mean, you come from a completely different work background than I do. You're also smarter and more competent than I am on a number of fronts. But I have had some weird workplace experience. I remember working in a translation office, and there were two females that, for whatever reason, just, well, they didn't like me. They weren't exactly hotties, and one was engaged, the other was kind of whatever. And so they would very pettily just get at me for anything. So I remember one day I brought a salad in that I made at home with some red onions in it. And they said, you're not allowed to do that because it creates a sting throughout the entire... Now, this was total hyperbole. It didn't, but they said, you know, the red onions are... They actually complained to the boss who, for whatever reason, was favoring them and said, you know, maybe in the future, you know, if you're going to bring a salad in, don't put red onions in there. It's absolute trivia, minutia, just totally petty. And, you know, they would constantly try to distract me from my work, you know, pretending to be friendly. So in a way, so trying to be friendly to me artificially so as to prevent me from concentrating, getting my work done, and then citing that later as me not doing my work properly. I had that experience. It was pretty awful. And I mean, I used to be a teacher too, and as you know, teaching is unfortunately dominated by females. I wish there were more male teachers because I think they bring something different and oftentimes better to the table. But in those situations, you know, essentially between breaks or whatever, you know, you get the female gossip sessions and you're sort of the lone dude there. Which I don't think that's just, you know, natural sexual partitioning, I think. But I don't think I've ever had people just go after me full ham in the ways you've described in your videos. And by the way, the audience, I don't mean great stories in the sense that they're positive, but Monday has some great, in air quotes, great stories on his channel about various episodes of this sort, far better than anything I could regale you with. But yeah, it certainly explains to me a great deal of why, I guess, your bemusement at just the kind of, I guess it explains to me a lot of the thrust behind your channel, because you've had some of those work experiences, like the one Harridan who, you know, your boss or the manager, who just looked at you and said that you were the spawn of Satan, and that was it.
That was it, yeah. It's like there's times I feel like I have a reality distortion field around me, and just weird shit happens, and that's been happening since my channel's been up. there was like one of the videos I did. There was somebody that I swear to God they had to be high or something, or I don't know if I couldn't quite tell if they were trolling or if they were on drugs. I'm serious when I say on drugs, because they commented about me being a dark-skinned black man, and that's why certain people didn't like
Yes.
me. You saw that one?
Yeah.
And right, and there was another one recently that contacted me through Reddit. Said, how'd she put it? Hold on, I want to get this exact quote because it's so good. Where is it? Here we go. I started ignoring her because she got kind of weird, and she said, "I will stalk you like a creeper, like a creepy creeping creeper." And yeah, like I woke up to I think 64 messages from her after she found me on Discord, and I'm like, why is this happening?
Based and red pilled, as they say.
Yeah. And actually, the funny thing is, not funny, haha, but when I was a kid, my mother said to me, "Shit just follows you," and she was right. It kind of does, like weird stuff. And since I've been public on YouTube again, I'm getting kind of like flashbacks to some parts of my 20s. Like there was one person I was talking to privately, it was a woman through email. I was telling her about some of the drama going on, like the stalk you like a creepy creeping creeper thing. And she on the email reply, she was laughing about it because it was some of the other stuff too was so ridiculous. And I remember back in my 20s having people see weird shit happen to me, and they're just laughing. They're not really laughing at me, so to speak, but like they're laughing at the ridiculousness of it. And I've gotten to the point where there's a lot of times where I just kind of, how should I put this? I look at the world and I think it just can't be real. Like this just can't be happening. It's too bizarre. Yeah.
Well, I have a friend who I've known for quite some time who is essentially convinced I'm cursed because of just various, I don't know how to put it, sort of bad luck bombardments. It's just, bad shit just happens. Things I can't really go into here because they're private nature. But, yeah, I can certainly partially relate. Well, one of my exes was a bit of a stalker. Well, the crazy one I mentioned her, the knocker girl. I split up with her, and she drove. I guess the equivalent in the U.S. because it was in Europe would be several states across the equivalent of several states to attempt to bash my door in. But the thing is, I don't think there's ever been a version of you, based on my impression, that would have been receptive to some crazy stalker girl. I mean, whatever your misfortune, it's not coming from a place of desperation. I mean, you're careful and you're judicious, and you're going to assess things in a reasonable way. Because at the end of the day, as you pointed out in your videos, there's so many people that are in quote unquote relationships or marriages that are just dysfunctional, totally fucked up. Like you mentioned one where it's the woman has 2 different children by 2 different guys at age 21.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are tons of examples of that sort of thing. And that's the thing. I mean, are you really missing out? I think that's something that I try to drive home talking to FA people in general, is that whatever salvatory effects you think a relationship might have, the people having relationships, and I've said that the first one I've had relationships, but they weren't positive experiences overall, quite the opposite. Now, has that colored me? Sure. But the idea that most people are having these good, wholesome relations, they're not. That's a small minority of people, especially these days. So even the guys who are getting their pee-pees wet, for the people obsessed with that, so what? They're getting their pee-pees wet, and broken women who are sometimes dangerous, at the very least highly dysfunctional, and where are the bragging rights there? It's just
that's one of the things I had to start making a distinction about on my channel, is because of some of the comments I've gotten where basically I was told, just take whatever comes along, and of course I'm thinking about that woman with the 2 kids,
Yeah.
divorced twice, and she was just turning 21 when my friend got involved with her. I'm like, okay, when I say get a relationship, I don't mean just get anything. I mean, like, I want to avoid obvious landmines, and yet I've had some people tell me, oh, you're overthinking things. It's like, I don't think avoiding an obvious landmine is overthinking things.
I've seen.
Yeah, I get the impression a lot of people are only quote unquote successful because they just literally took whatever came along, and then I don't even want to say, I guess I'll say try to make it work. But it's like, why would you throw yourself into a pool of acid and try to swim?
Well, this is interesting you bring this up because I've observed this too. Get back to that normie question. In a kind of field of normativity, your assumption is that people are kind of normal. But I've seen advice before I even knew about your channel, a lot, not advice to other people, saying, the problem with people in the manosphere, all right, this is, I'm paraphrasing, it's been a year or two, is that, these guys, they just overthink things. They just, normal people, they just meet up and they just try to make it work. You meet a pretty girl, you just try to make it work. Okay. But the problem there is that if people are more or less normal, which is to say, I guess their dysfunction is minimal or at least tolerable, flaws or foibles, okay, fine. But increasingly, we're living in a dysfunctional society, so the caution is warranted. It's necessary.
I very much agree with you on that, and I think that's one of the places the disconnect happens when people say you're being too picky or lower your standards or just take whatever comes along. Is, you know what? If I was surrounded by a bunch of happy, healthy people, just taking whichever one liked me and then trying to make it work might make a whole lot of sense.
Yep.
But when my point of reference is 2 kids divorced twice by the time she's 21, or other weirdness, then yeah, or wanted to stalk me like a creepy creeper. I'm like, no, I'm not going to lower my standards. No, I'm not going to just take whatever comes along because I can see the disaster waiting to happen. I mean, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't be willing to work with somebody. And because of my own background, I probably, if I'm going to have a relationship that actually works, I probably have to have somebody who has their own problems. And if they're working on them and they're coping with them, okay, that's, I can understand, trying to make it work with someone like that. But yeah, I think that you're right that the advice of just take whatever comes along only makes sense in very narrow contexts.
Yeah.
But in a broader, especially when, we do live in a dysfunctional society, and I think we're getting to a point, especially since the 2016 election, where like things are getting crazier in the United States. It's going to be impossible for normal people to not notice at some point, I would think.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Well,
I probably would be surprised.
The thing is that relationships these days are just increasingly Russian roulette. It's not just, no, it didn't work out. It's it didn't work out, and I'm going to be paying alimony for the next 18 years because of that. Maybe twofold or threefold if the number of children are up there. And on top of that, I'm going to be paying alimony for the next 8, and the child isn't even mine, but the state law or the legality of it says that I'm technically a father, even though I'm not. And then you have the marriage issue, and I get it. I get that perspective you're offering. I had a relationship once with a girl, and she had problems. She was significantly younger, but she made an effort. She really did.
That's hot.
Not so sure. But ultimately, her problem stemmed from her, I guess self-esteem issues and security issues, and it ultimately just drove me batty and drove me off the planet. It's just always checking up on me, asking what I was doing, being really petty about just minutia, like equivalent things. Why are you doing this? Talking to these people, the thing you'd imagine like children arguing over toys, and it all stemmed. Yeah, and I mean she made an effort, but unfortunately she never really improved. I mean there was improvement, and at some point in time I had to just jettison the thing. Never wished her any malice. That was probably the best one I ever had, I have to admit. But that said, so I was at a point where I would try to, I have my flaws too. You work with what you can if a person's making the effort. But that's, again, who really wants to play Russian roulette? And you're too smart a guy and just too perceptive to just throw yourself into stuff. And that limited context, I think, the problem is the context of normalcy is just, it's shrinking. So you're gonna even quote unquote normies are encounter dysfunctional people these days, they're going to be baffled by it if they're not
they will.
If they're not apprised of the notion that there's a huge wave of dysfunction that has swept over industrial society in the West, then they're just going to think, what's going on here? That's so strange.
Yeah.
I'm increasingly, social dysfunction is becoming a norm in some sense, and
In some places, yeah. I think
yeah,
so.
and so yeah, I think that you're probably right. That's going to be really, really hard for people not to notice some of this. And I just did a talk with Wojak that, and I liked the distinction he made in that talk, and also privately. You sort of have 20th century problems of wealth and, you could say, distribution of resources, which obviously you can never perfect that, right? There's always going to be some degree of imbalance, but generally speaking, people are kind of living like kings. There are issues, absolutely, right? I'm a poor motherfucker, but I'm living like the equivalent of a king would have, or even more so in the Middle Ages. But the new set of problems, he didn't use the term, but I get, or maybe he did, sort of 21st century problems of, okay, so those issues have been, in air quotes, solved, or at least remedied to the point that they're not that bad, which is why guys like Steven Pinker write books like Enlightenment Now,
Right, yeah.
or The Better Angels of Our Nature, I think it was 2011. Yeah, massive improvements. Crime is much lower across the board, blah, 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 blah. But they're new because of the social dysfunction and the lack of trust and the lack of cooperation, and all the things that feed into it. Of course, those are new problems, and people are in a state of despair. I see it on a daily basis on the internet, on Discord, other places where, the whole gloomer phenomenon, right, with the young people.
Yeah.
And the problem, I mean, I'm sure you have the same issue. I was asked not too long ago to sort of interview on the behalf of a young man who was in a state of despair. And I'm not exactly sunshine and rainbows. I don't know what to tell these guys anymore, because I can't be dishonest, because I'm a bit of a gloomer myself, blow smoke up their ass. Well, if you do this, what am I supposed to say? I don't think they're really functionally wrong about their view that there are few prospects, and not just in general, not just with women, whatever. Just, what do I do with my life? Where is it going to lead? Direction is a big thing, it's just not clear anymore. Now, in some cases, it's obvious. Maybe somebody has a lifelong interest or obsession. I have one friend who's just, this guy's mind is kind of off the charts. He was doing, as a 15-year-old, university level mathematics, and he's doing conjunction of computer science and physics, and he's been blessed by the gods with an amazing mind, and so he just uses that mind as interest. He's constantly preoccupied by that, and that keeps him away, by his own admission, from, I guess you could say nihilistic thoughts or despair, because the guy's really smart, and there's just so many things out there, and things that interest him, physics, mathematics, to keep him occupied. But that's not true of most people, unfortunately. So I don't, I feel bad. And starters, please try to help this guy. I don't know what I'm supposed to say. From what I understand, he's not necessarily wrong in his perception. So, and I don't have answers, because I'm not sure there are answers. And as I mentioned in the talk with Wojak, we don't have a lot of people in the mainstream really want to address this, because the the mainstream, people like Pinker and mainstream academia, they're looking at this from the 20th century perspective. Well, wealth inequality and lower crime and less disease, and yeah, that's all great. But now there's a sort of disease of the mind that is much more rampant. I actually saw an article, it's catching up to Germany, about chronic loneliness.
Yeah.
Although it was mainly directed to the elderly, understandably, but also that's sort of distributed throughout society. That people in Germany are increasingly, quote unquote, lonely. And this probably is going to be something, I guess, the problem of our day until we die, I suspect, as society becomes more and more stratified and more separated by small distinctions into different disparate communities, and there will be fewer and fewer answers. And what do you do when you try to be an honest, upright person, but want to help, but are not in a position to just blow smoke? Well, it'll be okay, if you just work hard and you do this, it'll be all right. I mean, maybe.
I can't lie to people like that.
I can't either. I honestly can't. And so I'm not a beacon of hope by any means, and I think a lot of people, take umbrage at that. But what's the point of being hopeful if there is none? Or, well, there's not much, at least. I mean, specific things. You're an IT guy. I'm sure if somebody wanted to get into it, you could probably give them good advice, right? And if somebody asked me, and they have, about translation, what I think, and I would advise everyone not to pursue a career in translation for obvious reasons, automation, shitty pay, but anyway. Yeah, I can, but broadly, what to do. It's, I don't know. I just don't know what to say. And that is a technical term from the Greek. It's called aphoria, the sort of not knowing which way to go. It's a philosophical term. It kind of describes the situation we're in. And this is why I have to, constantly dissuade people from looking at YouTube content creators, myself included, as anything other than just human beings. I'm not special. I'm not necessarily smart. I might be able to observe certain things, but I don't have the answers, and I can't. I'm certainly nobody's salvation. My life is hardly, as I said, sunshine and rainbows. And I think that, I hate to use the term guru. There's nothing guru about me, certainly, and I think a lot of other people. And there's some people. I mean, you know Coach Red Pill. You've had. I mean, there are people who are really sinister. I think who won't admit that. I mean, Coach Red Pill made this recent video about how Eastern European women are better, despite higher divorce rates there. And I mean, it's a kind of a joke. Everyone in the comment section knew it, but it just goes to show how cynical.
Yeah, I was surprised he made that video because it's easy to look up divorce stats. I mean, I guess I'll be charitable and say maybe his personal experience is different with the European women or the Eastern European women he's encountering. But I saw the comment section. Yeah,
I don't think he has good intentions, Coach Red Pill. Most of the platitudes he's repeated have sort of been floating around the manosphere since it emerged online. It's nothing new there under the sun. So yeah.
What do you think his angle is then? If he doesn't have good intentions.
This is my speculation, so I have no hard evidence to back this up, and I don't want to, slander somebody, but it just seems like he's out there to make a buck. He's living, as far as I know, in Ukraine cheaply, and it's
just ad revenue.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to make a buck, pretty much, and repetition is very effective. I mean, people want to hear certain things. Talking about women in general is just it attracts people, especially young men. Problem, whether they're problematic or this or that. I honestly find talking about women not that interesting, but the reality is that videos where I talk about women, they just do better. even though I intentionally don't do that all the time because I find talking about women to be boring. I have other interests. But yeah, I mean, sure. I just think at the end, I don't think he's a sinister guy. It's just he's out there to make a buck. I don't think I don't care anything about him one way or another. But
Yeah, he's been involved in some YouTube drama, and I try to.
yeah,
I'm going to try to stay out of YouTube drama, but I
do so.
suspect that as my channel grows, and some of the weird reactions I've already gotten, that once my channel gets big enough, I'll start getting YouTube drama on my own without having to do anything for it.
The important thing, Monday, is to not engage in YouTube drama. Now, there is a prominent instance in my YouTube history where I engaged and even pursued YouTube drama, which I regret. Now, this involves Sandman, of course. Everyone who's been around for a long time knows of my quote-unquote beef with him. To this day, I don't particularly enjoy his content, and I think he's been more harm than help. But I think engaging, I have to admit, I was being somewhat petty or just unnecessarily infantile, and I was just annoyed by the whole incident. I learned my lesson after that, whatever. There are all kinds of things on YouTube I don't like, and there are personalities I don't like either. But the drama isn't worth it for a hoary host of reasons, and it's just better to do your own thing. I wish I had never once mentioned Sandman or got upset, but different times, different mindset. The lesson to be learned from that almost certainly was just don't. And it was a failing on my part that you shouldn't be involved in drama. And you're not the type of guy, based on what I know, that even what's the point? That's what YouTube. By the way, YouTube. I mean, they have whole channels that thrive. What is it, Drama Alert or something like that. That's not what I'd think you would want to be about. You're a thoughtful, introspective guy. So drama is kind of a waste of time.
I agree.
All kinds of people are going to think negative things, and again, I looking back on it, that's probably my biggest sort of drama mistake. And the other thing I try to do, I just don't. There's so many comments, and it's rare. It's very rare I reply to comments. And I was tempted, for example, to respond to a comment or two in our talk or whatever, but the temptation's always there. But here's the thing about YouTube comment interactions: they never end well because they never end. They either never, they are, and they never. Nobody's willing to cede ground or whatever, and so that's also a pointless endeavor. So basically, a hands-off approach, in my view, is putting the content out there is the best thing, because one, people have their own perception of who you are as a content creator. And their projections, and they put you in that box, and it's just not a good medium for communication in general. And drama is perhaps the most popular medium or genre on YouTube, but it doesn't mean that it's suited to you as an individual. So I agree that your channel will grow and you're going to be doing better and better, but at the same time, and you'll be probably attacked by various people, especially since, for better or worse, you've I guess marketed yourself as an FA guy. So yeah, there'll be people out there.
It'll be interesting to me because like some of those videos I made about the weird comments that I've gotten. Like once I get as my channel gets bigger, I can start getting noticed. I can imagine getting very strange reactions from people they'll make YouTube videos about me, and then probably what'll happen. Well, I'll give an example back. I started noticing it back when I was in middle school, where there were some kids who thought I was too uptight all the time, and some kids who thought I was too mellow all the time. And the fun part was when you had one of each of these kind of kids in the same room, and they started arguing over whether I was too uptight or too mellow, like they were perceiving two different people. Or argue about two different people. And I can see the same thing happening on YouTube, where you'll have different channels arguing over who is the real Monday. And I mean, I guess it'll drive subscribers my way. So thanks,
Probably.
Yeah.
I think that, again, you're never. And first off, it's a question: do you really want people? The internet is a large and dangerous place with lots of unstable people.
That's true too.
I can attest to that personally. So you know, you don't necessarily want people to understand you too much. Most of them don't care. I mean, the problem, YouTube, I think in time you're likely to become, as much as anyone in your own little sphere there, kind of an icon, although you're obviously, because the nature of your channel is much more personalized than others. I don't like, you know, I'm a very private person, but beyond that, I like to just talk about things or general trends rather than myself. I'm not that interested in it because I'm not that interesting a person. That's one reason. Others too. But,
yeah, I don't feel like I'm interesting, but
well, you make yourself interesting because you put yourself out there, and so you'll become, you know, people will get a distorted view of who you are and your image, so to speak, and the perception of you will change in time.
Yeah, and I just want to cut off any commenters. One of the reasons I talk about my personal experiences is because I remember 20 years ago knowing something was going wrong, feeling completely lost, and I talk about my personal experiences to give specific examples of stuff that happened, thinking to myself, you know, 20-year-old me would have benefited from listening to a channel like my own. And if nothing else, maybe it'll make some of the guys going through this not feel quite as lonely. Maybe they'll hear one of my videos and say, "Oh, this is happening in my life. Okay, how can I fix it?" Because some of the issues I had, I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't have told you what. You know, even or maybe if they can't fix it on their own, they could go to an older person in their life, a parent or some type of mentor, and say, "Hey, I have this specific problem in my life. How do I fix it?" And you know, just being able to articulate the problem is part of being able to fix it. And that's something that 20 years ago I couldn't have done very well.
Well, you know, Monday, I've had this recurrent thought. Our generation, Generation X, is sort of the forgotten generation. We're sort of, the generation used to be this thing, right? This big thing. We're kind of smudged in between. So people joke and call us boomers or whatever. They don't even distinguish. Half the time it's not even a joke. Oh, you're just a boomer.
Right.
But there were, you know, you probably remember rotary phones too, I'd imagine. Yep. Yeah, I remember rotary phones, and remember the time before the internet where you'd make a telephone appointment with friends or whatever on your either rotary phone or what are the touch tone? Anyway,
the push buttons.
Yeah, and I wish I had known half the things 20 years ago that I know now. It was very much the cloud of unknowing. Everything. Yeah. There's nobody to turn to. There was no advice. I mean, for all the ills of the current year, the young men at least have just a plethora of sources for information.
Very true. Yeah.
And they can learn about I mean, you know, I don't know how great this is, but, you know, 14, 15-year-olds who are, quote, unquote, you know, MGTOW or whatever, that's what they call themselves. None of that existed. It was all just trial and error, a lot of error. And looking back on it, I could have spared myself a lot. I mean, nobody... See, one thing, I mean, he's not really around anymore, but Barbarossa was critical in my life as a content producer or thinker, who really broke things down to a cost benefit, where I just realized I'd never really, when I was growing up or when I was in my 20s, I never really framed these relationships or ships or whatever as, you know, what am I actually getting out of it? It was just this thing you were supposed to pursue. And, you know, come hell or high water, it didn't matter. That's what you did. Girl was into you, she was kind of cute, you just, you know, whatever. Try to make it work. And you just rinse and repeat. I mean, that's the normie attitude, and I was a normie and a blue pillar even 10 years ago. And, you know, Barbarossa was probably instrumental in waking me up and, you know, forever changed my thought on these matters. Those of you who don't know him, you should check out the early stuff from Barbarossa. His channel's still up there, Bar. It might not have the same impact it did back then, but if you want to really get revolutionary thought, try to remove your head from the current year and think, you know, 8-10 years ago when no one was really talking about it. and just think about how powerful that could be. And I didn't have it. Nobody was telling me this stuff. It was just this minefield, and I lost out on a lot. I had for example, a relationship with a female, and it turned out that she was engaged to someone because her fiance was in a different country at the time, and I had no idea. Right?
Oh my God.
Yeah. I thought I was in a quote unquote relationship, right? And look, ultimately, she gave me the line, well, I'm just not in a place where I can take too many risks. He was a sort of stable guy, and I was the obviously unstable guy. But I suppose interesting, if you want to put it that way. So after a year plus of what turned out to have been an affair, unbeknownst to me, she decided to go down, the safe route. And I remember, I'm not a malicious guy. I said, don't you think you should at least be honest with your future husband? And her well, that would only hurt him.
I've heard that bullshit before.
Yeah. And so sort of post factum justifying these things. But again, if I had been quote unquote woke, if I had been informed, I would have been much more suspicious about this female to begin with. And I would have been more suspicious about my borderline ex. I mean, I would have been probably suspicious about everything,
Why in retrospect, what would have made you more suspicious?
Well, in the case of that female, there are certain cues. I mean, they're very subtle. I look back on it, and I'm burdened by the knowledge I have now. So maybe I'm just reading into it.
You cut out. You said you're burdened by the knowledge you have now.
I'm burdened by the knowledge I have now. So maybe I'm just reading into it. But I think there were certain cues in her behavior. Like, for example, the desire to be, reckless in strange ways. I mean, look, I don't want to be graphic, and people can believe me or not, but she insisted on giving me blowjobs in public parks sometimes. It's very weird.
Oh.
Yeah. And I was okay with it, but I didn't see the point behind it. Mm-hmm. Sort of living, and not that I was ever, but I was the sort of unstable, distant, unreliable guy, I guess, which, whatever. And I couldn't understand, she was in her late 20s, what my actual appeal to her was necessarily as a partner. I spent a lot of time, you're smart, okay, but I don't have any real prospects, because at the time I was reasonably broke, I had some financial difficulties. It didn't really add up. Retrospectively, I put it together, but at the time, I didn't fucking have a clue. And mind you that, this female tried to stay in contact with me for a while thereafter. Eventually just broke off because she liked the attention, and I was in a kind of state of, my mind was a bit twisted. I still, obviously, having found out that she was engaged, soon to be married, I still had feelings at the time.
Oh, yeah, I can completely understand that. You probably even missed her after she was gone.
Oh, sure, for a while. And she ended up, popping kids out, and, I faded from her existence, and vice versa. And in her own right, she was a bit of an oddball. She'd always insist that I donate my brain to Harvard for research after I die. She was obsessed with morbid things. She ended up getting into sort of the medical profession. I suppose it fits her, and her husband, from what I understood, was always kind of a normie guy, very reliable, stable guy from the Midwest, just kind of upstanding. I don't think he deserved that. No. I don't know him from a hole in a wall, but for whatever reason, as far as I can tell, they're living a quote unquote okay life with popped out 2 kids and what have you. But I mean, looking back on it, looking for these little weird kind of cues, this is knowing what I know now. So why would a woman looking, for long-term relationship prospects, at the time at least, shack up with a guy who is, at the time, financially struggling, has health issues, other things? I get, finding me interesting or just kind of a bit exotic or whatever, but, yeah. So, but at the time, I never thought about that. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the,
I think you brought up a very good point with the blowjobs in the park in public,
Yeah.
is that one of the things I've noticed is that um, I used to think, like I was friends with a lot of very eccentric people when I was in my early 20s. Um, uh, I used to think eccentricities like that and other things were just kind of window dressing on an otherwise normal person. But now I think, no, the weird stuff is the real person. You know, like with her doing that in the park, there's probably other little signs too that in the past I would have certainly ignored, or might have thought, oh, this is exciting in the park. You
Oh
know?
yeah. Well, the example I think I brought up previously from my borderline ex was, she had this like battery of terminology for what she referred to as, protocol speech. Like, it's a birthday, another protocol day, and I always thought, oh, that's really. I thought she was being kind of interesting or edgy, and I thought that, that made her cool. But
Yeah.
it was more reflective of her own dysfunction. Look, I'm not big on
Her own disordered mind. Yeah.
yeah, birthday. I don't really give a shit one way or another, but I don't go out of my way to sort of besmirch people who think. But yeah, so these are kind of red flags that nobody told me about. It was all just trial and error.
Yeah.
And I wish I had that. I wish there had been a Barbarossa, 20 years ago, or 25 years ago, or whatever. Gods, I think my life would have turned out a lot differently. I think I'd be in a different place, and possibly overall more content. Because it just cost me a lot of time, energy, money, and one result of one of these relationships was eventually I just went broke.
Oh.
Essentially, yeah, because it was so stressful that I was so involved that I wasn't performing at the job, so I got sacked. And and then I was running out of money, and then so yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things that could have been avoided, I think, had I had this knowledge. But Generation X, we didn't have that. It was kind of the, I mean, you're a techie more than I am, but you had access to technology, but it wasn't ubiquitous, and there weren't blogs and vlogs and people talking about these things. And so, on the one hand, yeah, maybe our generation had it slightly better, sort of, not a less gloomer, or at least the doomer attitude was not as prevalent. Why would it be? Because so much of that is mimetic, right? It's spread online and people talk about it and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I kind of look at our generation as the lost generation. The generation of Fight Club, like that line by Tyler Durden, or we have no great war, our great war is our lives, that sort of thing. And there's no... so I don't know what's really better, but the one thing these young guys do have is the information. And I just can't help but want to sort of pound this home that however these FA guys feel, isolated or socially deprived or wanting of a quote-unquote meaningful relationship, it's just Russian roulette. It's not, as you pointed out, so many people just end up in relationships that suck, okay? And the guys, they get their pee-pee wet, right? And, I mean, I know it's hard to convey this, but sex is pretty overrated. People will differ on this view, but, it's, or it's Colton.
I don't think it's completely Russian roulette, but especially when you're young and inexperienced, it's hard to notice things that, now that I'm older, would set me off. That would make me say, something's wrong here.
Yeah.
Like, even before I got that message about she was going to stalk me like a creepy creeper, there was something about her writing style that made me think, something's off about this woman. I'm not quite sure what it is. So, I mean, at a point now where I pick up on a lot of little subtle things that 20 years ago, I definitely would not have picked up on at all.
Well, you're also less, you're more stable because 20 years ago, you were still in your prime. Your prefrontal cortex wasn't fully developed as a male. And all these other things, too. But I think largely it's a matter of information or lack of information that really afflicted our generation. And, you get, I think, oddities, which are ourselves in this case, you with your situation and me with my own weird situation. And then you get the people, the Gen X, that they follow the normal roadmap, and they're divorced, they can't see their. You get that too, lots of them.
Those poor guys.
Yeah, who they did everything quote unquote right. They followed Jordan Peterson's advice, and they still got screwed.
Yeah.
So I suppose at that stage, Peterson would say, "Well, the story of Job. There are important lessons to be learned from Job." So yeah, but I'm not. I do think that's a powerful tool, but conversely, on the internet, you have the internet creates these echo chambers where people just gather together and to engage in either fits of despair, sort of joint sessions of despair, and they don't. It's hard to escape because they just like draws like, misery loves company.
Yeah, it does.
And so there's that question. What do you do in situations like that? Because they have the information, but at the same time they're being drawn into these places where the outcomes are largely negative, and that they're not. Nothing good is really coming of it. It's sort of a jerk fest, and there are variations of it.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I don't want to go too much off on a tangent, but just to share with your audience.
Go ahead.
One of the things about me that I did not realize for a long time, since we were talking about taking chances with relationships or looking at warning signs, is that I've had it suggested from some people that my high openness and my empathy is probably going to attract a lot of weird, broken, damaged, or dangerous people. And that's not something I would have thought of before. Although I did have a friend of mine's, now ex-girlfriend, back in my mid-20s, say to me, you're going to attract a lot of weird people. And to some degree, that's fine because, I guess I can count, if I've been single this long, you can count me among the broken, I suppose. But I wouldn't have recognized the difference between, say, someone who is eccentric or someone who has problems and they're coping with it, and someone who is like dangerously broken, where they're going to bring, I don't mean dangerous like they're going to stab you, but just they're going to bring harm into your life. That's not something I would have picked up on. But one of the ways to guard against that is having the right boundaries, because people who are like borderlines and narcissists, they test boundaries to see who's vulnerable. Yeah, and having good boundaries in place and being able to put your foot down and say, no, you need to stop. That can keep all the I was going to say the right people or the wrong people. I guess the damaging people. They can keep them out of your life. Another thing I've had some people suggest to me is that now in my videos I don't really display much in the way of emotions, in part because I'm sitting in front of a camera talking. And I actually had a meetup with a subscriber that I was talking to him, and he casually mentioned what city he lived in. And I was like, hey, I live in the same city. Let's have a meetup. And after about 4 hours over beer, he said to me that in case anyone was wondering, I do show emotions and act like a normal person when I'm in real life compared to in my videos. And he couldn't pick up on anything in me that would really, for why I should have this kind of long-term dating problems. But I do have to wonder if some of my stoicism still comes out in real life and is attracting emotionally unavailable women. And that's not something I would have thought of, definitely would not have thought of 20 years ago either.
Well,
and I'm just, like I said, it's a little bit of a tangent, but, since, because of your audience, they might find that information interesting, that there's aspects of your personality and who you are that's going to attract certain kinds of people and repel other kinds.
Well, one point is women by their nature test boundaries. I mean, that's what they exist. The whole point of a shit test. Shit tests are real. They test boundaries.
Yeah.
They're looking at where you draw the line, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but then once you draw the line, they'll respect it.
If you can, yeah. It depends. Shit tests never end. I mean, the whole point of, sort of the Rollo Tomassi version of PUA, it's sort of the red-pilled married man where, your wife is shit testing you for the rest of your life until you drop dead, essentially. And that's just
I'm just
the
thinking that
nature
there's
of
going to
them.
have to be a difference between how narcissists do it and how regular women do it, because
Yeah, maybe.
narcissists are a lot more damaging than anything a woman's going to do to you. Well, maybe not exactly, but if you include divorce court. But I'm just
Yeah,
thinking about boundary testing is what I mean.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, here's a huge tangent, but it's something that we have in common as well. When we're both younger, we both engage in comfort eating, and I've been thinking a lot about the obesity epidemic in the U.S. and across the globe. It has
Mm-hmm.
all sorts of it's a multifactorial phenomenon, to say the least. I've made videos and talked extensively about the problem with sugar, and there are a lot of elements, undeniably. But
Yeah.
fact of the matter is that to be driven to, because that's what I did when I was younger too. When I was a fatty when I was a young person and a teenager. And I don't remember how much weight, but the point is, yeah, I would come home to a largely, because my parents would, they'd come home at different times, they worked at different times, and I kind of, I mean, retrospectively, the things, right? You remember the craze in the '90s where everything was fat free. Remember
Yeah.
the fat, like you could get the chocolate marshmallow cookie thingies that were fat free, and you thought,
Yep.
because you knew nothing about nutrition at the time, that, oh wow, I could just eat like the whole fucking box. I'm off. I'm Gucci. Yeah, I did that all the
Yeah.
time. I'd come home, eat that fat free ice cream, eat that. So yeah, I had that, and I can't help but think that is because so many of these things have environmental cues, and apart from the input from the neurochemistry involved in eating certain types of foods, it's obviously a huge factor. What's driving people to these limits? I mean, do people
Despair.
right? So this is the alarming thing, Monday. If you think about it, if my hypothesis has any semblance of truth to it or accuracy, is that given the prevalence of obesity and just being significantly overweight,
Mm-hmm.
if much of, I mean, let's set aside pure physiological hormonal disturbances. If much
Right.
of it is just people with relatively normal metabolisms, the there has to be a social environmental input there, and the
Yeah.
degree we see of it distributed across not just Germany is increasingly very obese. I mean, everywhere basically.
America, yeah.
America's, more. It's always up there.
Ridiculous,
The Middle
yeah.
East. The Middle East is now. I forgot at the moment. The Middle East. I think I forget what it's Qatar maybe, but or Qatar, however you pronounce. The Middle East is becoming the most obese place in the world. But nonetheless, it's there. It's obvious, especially in places like the South. And if I'm right about this, my intuition here, and that we both know as people that used to, and I still do it. I mean, I managed to keep my weight off because I'll have days where I'll just say, fuck it, I'm just gonna fucking get these pastries, and I just don't give a fucking shit. And then and I might even do it for a couple of days, and then what I do is I seize control myself, and then I fast for several days, get almost no sleep. Like it's to this day. I mean, that whole episode is affecting me this day. I control my weight. I'm in decentish shape, not as much as I used to be, but it's just that just never really leaves you. I think, at least my experience, it's like people with alcohol. They can't ever really, they can't really ever just drink casually, or smokers too. Like once you've had your first fag or cigarette rather, or you smoked for a while, you just kind of can light up at any time, even if you haven't done it for 20 years. But all these emotional cues are going into all of these types of behaviors and manifest differently. It's just that what I think, and this is my hypothesis, I can't prove it, it's my speculation, is that food and the neurochemistry that is involved and the types of foods out there, because we know the companies they hire people, they have people to work on these foods to make them as addictive as possible, coupled by social cues such as people just having unfulfilling, miserable lives. is creating this epidemic. I'm not sure if people would be as susceptible if they had fulfilling, meaningful lives and meaningful
I
social
completely agree with you on that. Yeah.
connections. I think that you'd still get some of it because, you know, the food is poison. Sure, you know, the fat-free marshmallow chocolate cookies are not good for you, but or the Doritos or whatever. But you'd get much less of it. There'd be more resilience, and yet people just fall into this. And I know I'm gonna, you know, I mean, again, I'm in all right shape, more or less, but it's just, I will always have to fight this for the rest of my life. It's just something that, you know, I'm always on guard against that phenomenon because I know I've done it for a day or two. You know, I want that pastry and fuck it all. I just don't care. I kind of move into apathy mode, and immediately you feel like shit afterwards when you eat the ice cream or the pastries and you're not eating quote unquote clean or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, and so how much of that is fueled by the social dysfunction, despair we see, the disentanglement of people.
It's one of the things that bothers me too,
Yeah.
is that the social dysfunction is becoming so obvious, and yet people don't see it. I mean, you can literally see it on people's waistlines. Like think about that. Because now if you grabbed a time traveler from earlier in the 20th century, and well, actually, let me make this.
Well, you are a time traveler, at least to me.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah. But I remember watching and I've heard some other people mention this too. Like I was watching some old, I think it was from the 50s, talking about weight loss, and it showed a woman on there that needed to lose weight, and by today's standards, she didn't look fat at all. And apparently she was getting made fun of for being fat in the workplace. And I'm like, really? In today's workplace, she would not stand out. And then I've seen some other people make casual comments, like they watch old TV shows, like really old ones, like from the 50s, 60s, 70s. And they'll have a character on there getting made fun of for being fat. And this one guy said, for a while he was laughing along because he thought that people were being ironic. But then he realized, no, that's what a fat person looked like back then.
Yeah.
And that's how different it is. So if you got a time traveler from the early or even mid 20th century to come forward, they would look at America and be horrified and say, what the hell is happening? Everything's falling apart. Maybe not everything's falling apart, but they would know something was wrong.
Yeah.
Because their frame of reference is, not, I mean, like the people who are trapped in those Walmart scooters, that did not exist.
Yeah.
Yeah. That just was not.
Fortunately, I've never been there. I mean, I got really bad towards the end of my teenage years. Then I started running, and then by the mid-20s, I was hitting the gym, bruh, and eventually got in this pretty good shape towards the end of my 20s. But it's and again, to my experience, food to me is a drug, and I usually win against it, but it is fucking hard. I have to fight it, and the fact that I barely fucking sleep doesn't help because it ruins your quote-unquote willpower and your ability to just function. It's but here's the thing. I see so much of this myself, is that food is the most readily available drug out there. But I know tons of skinny dudes are in shape. They have other. I don't drink alcohol ever because I loathe it. I cannot stand alcohol. I hate it. I don't like the taste. It's not an issue for me for those reasons. But I know alcoholics. Well, I mentioned my friend Adam Jensen, who passed away by his own hand. I got to be careful about what I say because if you talk, I'm going to be really kind of circuitous here. I've noticed that videos on YouTube they disapprove of talking about checking out early, so to speak. So anyway, so that's that's my euphemism here. But yeah, I mean, other people have other problems. So, but it all stems from the general social anxiety, despair. So some people, I would say a large number of people, they fall into the food trap. I did, you did. Other people fall into the alcohol trap. Some people do both. That's really unfortunate. Some people fall into opioids and whatever drugs. So, but it's all stemming from a common source. We're not living in a healthy society with healthy relationships with people, and people are looking means of coping and dealing with that. And the obesity thing, mean, it's obviously complex. So for takes a guy like Boogie from YouTube, right? He's got gastric bypass, and he's losing weight. He's a lot thinner than he used to be. But the point is, some people can't fathom how somebody can get there. I mean, there's some other things where people talk about willpower, and I don't. It's a separate discussion. I don't really think.
When you're that big, I think it has to be mental health.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think willpower, it's just a meaningless term to me. I don't know what people are talking about when they talk about that, but whatever. You know, so, well, because it has so, well, never mind free will discussions. That's, I don't want to get into that now, but willpower is just this term people use. I guess if you're consistent, you have more willpower, but my productivity and my ability to get things done literally depends on the night before of how much I slept. I had a good workout yesterday because the previous night I slept 5 hours, which is a lot for me. Although tonight, before I talk with you, I think I only got a 2.5. And I was literally, you know, pressing 10 kilos more on the bench, and everything was just better. Now, is it willpower? No, it's just because I slept more. So I just don't, this nonsense term. The point about Boogie is, I don't know about his past, but obviously something fueled that.
I think he's publicly talked about getting molested as a kid.
Oh, well, there you go.
So yeah.
You know, and in my own case, when I was a child, you know, I was always, even before I at the time put on weight, I was a bit of an outcast because of my interests and just my, I guess, weirdo personality. And, you know, okay-ish parents, I guess, but distant, not often there. So again, those fat-free products became that was the thing.
Emotional crutch, yeah.
Emotional crutch. And the problem, yeah, I mean, you seem to have dealt better. You're not as obsessed with food as I am. I'm to this day still, I control it to the best I can, and I do a decent job, but I fucking, to this day.
Yeah, I'll tell you something I've only mentioned in one of my videos, and I don't know what to think of it. I don't know why it happened this way, but I remember at some point I stopped, well, I used to think about food pretty much all the time. Like, I would finish one meal and be thinking about my next one. Mm-hmm. There would be times where you would think I starved as a kid because I would walk around the house looking in the cupboards and the refrigerator just to look at the food, just to confirm there was food there. And then once I lost most of the weight, once I got down to about 200 pounds, those thoughts all just stopped on their own.
At what height exactly?
5'11".
Okay, yeah.
So I was still about 20 pounds overweight, but you know, once I hit right around that weight is when those kinds of obsessive, I don't want to call it, I don't necessarily mean clinically obsessive, but frequent thoughts about food just stopped on their own. I didn't go to a therapist. There wasn't any kind of mental exercises I was doing. And I know it wasn't me doing that because I didn't even realize how frequently I thought of food until the thought stopped. And so I went years and years and years of my life, decades, just obsessive, like constantly thinking about food, thinking that was perfectly normal. So I don't know what to think about that, but
I wasn't, you know.
But the kind of stuff you're talking about, yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I've been leaner than I am now, but I've been at some point in time, you know, very lean, like near six-pack lean. I still was upset. Like I just can't, for whatever reason. Every day is, you know. But to me, I mean, I know it's my kind of my own set. I was convinced that the vast majority of that issue and pretty much everything else just comes to chronic sleep deprivation. It's so hard to communicate to people how you're a completely different human being.
So you're eating to stay awake?
No, but my ability to control my
appetite.
Appetite, yeah. I mean, there are studies that show this. Appetite goes up when you don't sleep enough.
Yeah. It's part of the downward spiral of things like sleep apnea.
Yeah,
because you get it because you're fat, and then you get fatter because you're not sleeping because your regulation of the
I mean, when you don't sleep enough, everything's affected. You don't think as clearly. You're dumber. Everything. So, look, if in some alternative universe where I could actually get this problem fixed, I probably would think less. I mean, I control it to the best. You know, I'm not. You know, it's not an issue really, because I control it. But everything would be better, pretty much. So in my case, pretty much, 80 to 90% of my problems just come from chronic sleep deprivation. I suspect strongly because, it's not sleeping 5 hours versus 2 or night and day. I mean, get better lifts, have more energy. I eat when that happens. It's rare. I don't spend all day thinking about food necessarily. So that's a sort of, in my case, a mitigating factor or an interfering factor. But yeah, a lot of these other people, I just can't help but think that if you wanted to see a physical manifestation of despair and social dysfunction, well, look out the landscape of the Walmart scooter guy or whatever. And it's funny because obesity is an issue people talk about. You see these YouTube channels that talk about it a lot. There's even this guy called Everyday Fitness, which is kind of a call out channel. He's kind of a dude bro, though. He's like, he doesn't talk exactly, hey, man, you need the gym, like that. But, saying, telling morbidly obese people, like, do you know it's unhealthy to be morbidly obese? Yeah, there's some freaks who say, no, it's perfectly fine. Most of them know that.
Yeah, I know. It's ridiculous when they're like, where's your wake-up call? They know something's wrong.
But, I think you would get a lot less of it when it came to alcoholism or drug, because food and the chemicals in it, they're drugs too. But nobody, I think there isn't that instant connection, right? As you said, well, I'm a Coke addict or, I'm an alcoholic. People, I'm not saying they'd approve of it. No, they wouldn't. Right. Well, they say, oh, that kind of makes sense. But, you're a food, the wake-up call. It's bizarre because addictions all follow similar patterns. Biochemically, they do too, in terms of neurotransmitters and what have you. And this is, we talk about boxes. I talk about this in my videos, this problem of self-extrapolation. Everyone is in the game of extrapolating from their own personal experience into other people.
Yep.
If I can do it, you can do it too. It's moronic, Yeah, it doesn't work like that for anything. Anything. Not a single fucking thing. And I don't typically get upset about me, but people who engage in self-extrapolation and try to project they're fucking retards. And it's a few times I feel like almost being, because I'm fucking much better at languages than most people are. It's just a fact. I have a near perfect German accent, and people say, how do you do it? I don't say, why do you just work? Shit like that. I don't ever do that. But when I feel like, and I didn't do anything for that. It's just the way I happen to be. And in other cases, people are really good at mathematics or what have you. It's just, so the fact that, Everyday Fitness is a dude bro who hits the fucking gym. He happens to have the right environment and genetics to fucking do that. And he's, talking about a wake-up call and saying, if I can do it. And it's amazing that I got into conversations with people who were severe drug addicts who through quote-unquote willpower, whatever that is, managed to kick the habit, allegedly, and have this just so narrative story for themselves, extrapolate, say, well, I was addicted to cocaine and alcoholic, but I managed to kick it. Statistically, very, very unusual, mind you. But people as individuals are able to kick that habit. But still, and then just think that everyone else can be able to do it. It's just they don't have enough willpower or they're a bunch of losers. I would say the following. If you have a macro phenomenon like mass obesity, which we certainly do these days, and all these people just lack willpower, if it's a common, I would say that it is, it's phenotypically normal that people, quote unquote, don't have willpower. Then there's something else afoot. I would say people like Everyday Fitness are the exception, not the rule. Because so many people are afflicted by it. And if you want to count just being overweight, well, and then you're talking about something like 60% of the American population, maybe even higher.
Yeah.
And so...
I think I saw one of his videos where he was talking about, I don't know if it was Boogie or someone else, their friends enabling their bad eating behavior. And at least he's right about that and recognizes it, because that's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration when it comes to obesity, is that, if you're around a bunch of other friends who are fat, you're going to be encouraged to eat socially. If you're around a bunch of other people who are fit, they're probably going to encourage you to, there's some social pressure to reduce your food intake and do more exercise. So I think that's part of the larger obesity problem that we're facing. And from what I know, like things like divorce and obesity do travel on social networks, but with, as no pun intended, as big as obesity is, like in America, I think it is 60 or 70% of American adults are overweight or obese. Yeah, I'm sure some of it is food, probably a lot of things going wrong at the same time, but yeah, it's a good indication of despair on people's part.
Absolutely, and I think these people are just missing the mark. And again, there's nothing that it's like really.
They need therapy. They don't need a diet plan.
Under my hackles, and people thinking, if I could do it, and these people's, it's just a fucking meaningless term, because I've just never thought that way. I've always noticed that people are different in their capabilities and their faults and virtues. So the idea to say that I can do something or somebody else can do something, I mean, and people know this. So they see the guy at the gym who's able to, lift an extraordinary amount of weight, and he kind of stands out, and they know that's not, say, normal. So you have a kind of average gym goer, or the guy who's kind of average at mathematics or whatever. But if you see all these people being afflicted by the state of being overweight, or and even worse, obesity, then I'd say we're moving to an area where maybe that is the norm. Maybe most people react that way to despair. Maybe comfort eating and the consequences might be far more normal than everyday fitness and his call out, where's your wake-up call, bruh? You just got to hit the gym, bruh. This is kind of useless. It's like, what is the term? I'm so tired. Dealing not with the root of the cause, but symptoms, essentially.
Oh, yeah.
This is what real phenomenon we're talking about right now. It's like saying, well, if you hit the gym and, you lower your calories and reduce your carbs and you lower insulin level, that's. But even though that might be effective, that's still talking about symptoms.
Right.
So you're gonna still have these problems. You're still gonna be dealing with these things, and this is something that the dude bro just doesn't get. Probably doesn't care to get, because he just spent his whole life in that little bubble where it's just. I mean, I guess, and there are natural phenotypes. A guy like Jocko Wilkins, is his name Wilkins?
Yeah.
Yeah. You can tell by his facial structure that he's quote unquote high T. You can I don't know what he has the jawline.
The Navy SEAL guy.
He has a very sort of brutal looking face, pronounced
He's a
brow
warrior
line.
phenotype.
Yeah, well, that's the warrior phenotype. The jaw, the brow.
Yeah.
He has the warrior. That's a real thing.
Yeah.
I didn't say neither you nor I have that, but the point is that guy was always going to be in shape and be doing stuff. That's just how he was. And if he hadn't been, he would have probably found a way to do it anyway, because he wasn't going to be that bookish guy chilling out at the library and doing nerdy research. So we know that they're different. I mean, this isn't well studied, but the warrior phenotype is the thing in that sense. I would assume that his hormonal levels are different from the if you select him in a line or something. People don't take these things into account, but most people say aren't the warrior phenotype, and so you get a drug out there like certain types of food, and you have social dysfunction in the home or in the environment, and it's going to lead to something. And you've made a lot of videos about how, I guess these revelations. So that thread from bodybuilding.com, you said, is like 10 quadrillion pages long. Obviously, I'm joking about the.
Yeah, it's a thread on bodybuilding.com called "Were You Treated Differently After You Lost Weight?" And it's been running for over 10 years now. Last time I looked at it, it had like over 260 pages of replies. So not 260 replies, but 260 pages of replies, probably more now. And yeah, people talked about how it was like they walked into a different world. Almost like that old, you look it up on YouTube, the old Eddie Murphy skit called, I believe it was called White Like Me, where he disguised himself as a white man, and how differently, I mean, it was done as comedy, but how differently he was treated everywhere. And people talk about that, you know, and it wasn't just strangers treating them differently. Family treated them differently. They were treated differently at the office. Like all of a sudden they got promotions. And some of these people were older. They were in their 30s. And they said, I know, you know, they were smart enough and old enough and mature enough to realize that their work didn't get any better. The only thing that changed was their waistline. And all of a sudden, then the boss noticed their good work. All of a sudden, then the boss noticed that, hey, you're pretty smart. Or there's a few people that talked about the reverse, where like one guy was working at the same company for like 10 years or however long, and he got sick for a while. Had to go to the hospital and was given like large amounts of steroids, and really and he didn't blow up in a good way. He blew up like in a fat way. And he said, these are people who knew me for years, and all of a sudden they wouldn't look me in the eyes in the hallway. They wouldn't, you know, they didn't. Like people started being more rude to him, and they all knew. And he said they all knew I was sick because he had been gone in the hospital for like 2 weeks, and they all sent him cards. You know, get well soon. And you know, he eventually lost the weight, and then all of a sudden people started treating him normal again. And he said that was the only time with the weight where he got a bad performance evaluation. And he was like, you know, I know my performance probably suffered a bit because he was sick.
Yeah.
You know, but again, everybody knew that he was under doctor's care. And then once he lost the weight, everything was fine again. And that's, I mean, you can read those stories. They are pretty mind-blowing, or how
I've seen some.
people have family turn against them. You know, like if you're in a fat family and you're the one who loses the weight, they turn against you.
There's that economy of thinking. I mean, that's just evolution right there, because obviously, you know, looking at genetically healthy people typically is not associated with fatness or obesity. So it's a disgust reaction, basically. You know, something to be avoided.
From what I've read, disgust reaction.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Most things. I mean, very little of this. I mean, a phobia is a phobia, like my mild cynophobia. I see a big dog, a bull mastiff, or a pit bull, I'm going to cross the street. I'm not going to walk. It's just an instinct. You know, that's a real phobia. It's a fear. I don't think they're disgusting. That's the difference here. Fat people, it's not a phobia. It's definitely a disgust reaction, and it stems from our evolutionary past. It's just, you know, people like that would not be able to contribute to survival and would be viewed as poor partners in reproduction.
From what I've read about it, I think I believe the line of thinking on this is it's a disgust reaction because people are thinking of disease, like they're associating it with like this person is sick.
Yep.
I need to get away from them, and I don't want to catch their disease.
Yeah, basically, it's because it doesn't,
like, that's the unconscious part.
Because virtually nobody at the time, you know, 15,000 years ago, nobody could look like that for all sorts of obvious reasons.
Yeah, there wasn't enough calories. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was this kind of environmental limitation right there, and people were in close-knit communities. So I can imagine that socially they were closer. Many were kin, genetic related, you know, yada yada yada. So there's that natural. So it's just hardwired into people. And as you pointed out, you know, with lookism more broadly, but I don't really like that term. But yeah,
I don't like it either.
Yeah, I mean, you literally can go from. I mean, I had to me it was kind of obvious that when I transitioned from, you know, somebody in late teenagehood who was fairly fat to then slimmer, then to, you know, somebody with traps, you know, that sort of made sense. And that here's another thing, man. Talk about going to the gym. Very few people go to the gym for health. I mean, it's purely. I don't want to call it narcissistic in a sort of clinical sense, but it's like the ancient Greek myth. I mean, people go to the gym to look good. What fueled my motivation back in the day was because it made me look better, and I was pulling more pussy, and women would check me out. And both men and women are playing the same game there. very few people are doing. I do it these days for health, because if I don't do it, I'll get probably really fat. I just feel more miserable than I already am, and already have injuries, and it's a way of sort of limiting atrophy. But I don't do it fanatic. I just can't for obvious sleep and other things. But certainly when I was more in my prime and kind of obsessed with lifting weights, there's I guess you'll get the odd guy who just likes the exercise itself, but there's the underlying, you could say that's the proximate cause, but the ultimate cause, the underlying motivation, has a lot to do with just reproductive drives. And so, it's no surprise that fat people, obese people are viewed essentially as the disease-ridden. I don't know why this surprises people, because if it's our firmware, this is how we evolved. I'm not saying it's good necessarily,
right?
And you can get to the point.
How it is, yeah.
Yeah.
I think most people realize to some degree that looks matter, but they don't realize how massive of an impact looks has on our lives. Like, did you see I assume you saw the Wojak video about looks and dating.
Well, I did an entire talk with him about that.
Oh, that's right. You did a follow-up on that. Yeah, you did.
So,
yeah, that is amazing to me, the massive impact where, I would have thought, oh, well, maybe you're not the best-looking person, but something will make up for it. No, apparently not.
Well, what's more astounding is, Monday, I think the example is you're an accountant. Like, do you do the numeracy correctly? That's the most important thing. Nope.
Oh,
it's more important. Oh, sorry. Yeah. This is the problem with time travel.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a time paradox right there. The examples you sometimes, you're an accountant or engineer. So if you're an accountant, are you proficient in numeracy? That's the most important. Nope. It's actually more important that you look like a Chad and you're in good shape. Because then if you make mistakes, they'll make, whatever. It's astounding. I mean, I've been aware of examples like that, but it's just how much more forgiving everything and everyone becomes. And but there is an exception. I think that when the stakes are high enough, that shit doesn't matter anymore. So you look at the people who worked on the hydrogen bomb or the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
None of these dudes were fucking lookers. They're all fucking average to fucking ugly, and butt ugly in some cases. But they just knew, the people know, like, yeah, look, these guys are the smartest people in the world. We need them.
Yeah. And we got to win the war.
And I think there's a threshold where people who are smart enough know that, well, just because he's a Chad doesn't mean he's going to be able to, configure an H-bomb or an A-bomb.
When it's life or death, they'll might reconsider. But
but in any other situation, even when the stakes are reasonably high, like building a bridge, I suspect probably, and you probably would have, I have no data, this is my speculation, that for aviation, you probably would get a better pilot evaluation if you look like a Chad.
Probably.
Than somebody who's technically more competent, who's a better pilot, who flies better than you. It's astounding, and certainly it's been a part of a wake-up call. I mean, I've always been, I guess, subconsciously aware, but the degree, it's really the degree. It's just how basically,
I agree. Yeah.
If you had to, if you need, let's say you could only choose one metric for success in life. You could be either a 9 in terms of looks, but you kind of average to slightly above average intelligence, or you could have intelligence off the charts, but be only average or slightly below average looks. The much more reliable factor here would be being a 9 in looks. 100%.
Yeah.
I
got an email from someone who said that they were watching one of my videos about self-improvement and how I did things like camping, hiking, fishing, canoeing. I saw live stage plays. I've dug into things like music and literature and musicals and all this other stuff. And at the end of the video, I said, I should have just looks maxed instead. And if you want to do that other stuff for personal enrichment or because you're curious about it, but if you want to do it to make yourself a well-rounded, interesting person that people are going to like, just hit the gym. Seriously, like if you're doing any of that, stuff for any reason besides, hey, I kind of really enjoy watching stage plays. If you're doing it to make yourself this more interesting person that's going to be more marketable for dating, forget it. Just hit the gym. and get your diet right. And in fact, even on the work environment, I mean, yeah, you got to be competent, but look good if you want to get ahead. That's pretty much
as
it.
good as possible. Looks max, irrespective of what the baseline is. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, my character. Fuck your character. Get abs.
Yeah. Well, literally, yeah. Nobody gives. I mean, nobody gives a shit about character in more sort of less life or death situations. Obviously, we're going to talk about the Manhattan Project here. But yeah, so any normal workplace environment, an office environment, just look good. I mean, obviously, be able to do your job basically.
Yeah. I mean, outside of extremes as well, because I know someone in the comment section is gonna say something stupid about, like, so you can just poop on your desk and everything will be fine if you're hot. No, okay. Outside of weird, crazy behavior, like pulling down your pants and pooping on your desk.
Right. But the point is, if you're an accountant and you're 8.5 or 9 and you got broad shoulders, and I'm willing to bet the bank that you could fuck up some numbers there and get away all right. Whereas the guy who's, I don't know, schlumpy or whatever, and, just kind of overweight or fat, he's going to be held to a higher standard.
Yep.
And that's just the way it is, and there's no way around that. And the sooner people come to terms with that, the better. I don't, I think the real problem really is I've always called this maladaptation, but we're living in an environment that does not resemble our ancestral environment at all. So, 20,000 years ago, there weren't, almost certainly, I'll just assume there were none, but almost no fat people, no obese people. You didn't meet random strangers. It just didn't happen. In the sense that you did, you engaged in tribal warfare with them. So we're still using this primitive firmware in the current year, even though it has no resemblance whatsoever to how we evolved, and we're operating off of cues that are primordial. And that's the one thing I always drive. I've been saying for years. Look, just be honest with people. Stop pretending we're anything more than a bunch of fucking animals. Stop. Just stop it. Please. You're hurting people. You say you want to help people, right? You, not people. They want to be generous. They want to be helpful. Well, the first thing you can do is fucking level with people. Stop pretending we're better than we are animals. We're human apes. I mean, no pun intended. The reason why, I'm a guy who occasionally thinks when my brain isn't completely dysfunctional, and I happen to be an ape. We're all apes. Stop pretending that we're not apes and not animals. Stop it. It's hurting. Trying to elevate us to more than we actually are. And look, there's something else I've been thinking about Monday, with respect to this, is that part of civilization, you could say the expanded circle of contact and compassion, is a type of social contract. You notice how throughout the ages, and by this I mean millennia, the degrees of tolerance and, I guess, how should I put this? The degrees of what people could tolerate as acceptable, it increases from the time of, you heard of the Code of Hammurabi, 4,000 years old, give or take. You do this, you're getting amputated for it.
Yep.
As things become more and more comfortable, as civilization develops, people become more the social contract of what's acceptable and what we tolerate. It becomes too. I suspect it's probably even a couple of thousand years ago, if there's some freak that became obese, they would just leave him to die or execute him.
Probably, yeah.
Infanticide was rampant throughout human history and prehistory, et cetera, But so we reached the point where we're probably not going to get much further in terms of the compassion and how much we actually exceed as individuals to the social contract. And so this is the limit, and the limit is, we're going to pretend to be nice to fat people or unattractive people or whatever, but we're not actually going to be nice to them. We're going to keep them out of the photos. We're going to whatever. That's pretty much the limit. We're not going to outright go after them and drive them from the village or quote unquote disappear them because I'm worried about YouTube and things like that. But sure, we'll tolerate you sort of, but just get out of our faces and get out of our lives, and don't show up. Don't be part. Don't go. If you're going to work, make sure you fucking huddle in the corner and don't associate with us. And I think the greatest gift people could give anyways is start leveling about the realities. We are fucking animals. We're a bit smarter than your average animal, probably, some of us, but that's about it. And all those instincts, they're still there. I mean, they're all there. They've been primed by millions of years of mammalian evolution, and you're not going to get rid of them. Yes, through a lot of effort, you can. I suspect you'd be willing to talk to a fat person, and listen to what he or she has to say. Maybe you don't find them attractive, but and evaluate their thoughts because you're that type of guy. But even so, we still have those instincts. I mean, again, I'm not opposed to homosexuality, but I don't want to look at gay guys making out or having sex. I have a disgust reaction, and I avoid it.
Well, your best friend Wojak is gay.
Yeah, well, but I mean, again, I don't think he'd take umbrage with what I'm saying. Is that I just we evolve with certain instincts, and the sooner we come clean about this, that we're just a bunch of animals, and in some cases better than your average animal, but in other cases not so much better.
I suspect part of the problem is that a lot of people just aren't aware of it. It's not that they're lying so much, is that they really believe the bullshit that they are saying.
Oh, I know, but that's the whole point. This is actually a matter of education, Monday. This is a matter of education. Look, I've been saying this for fucking years. Because, all right, I'm very unstable because I've been sleep deprived for weeks. Every time the summer we're in the summer, where it gets hotter, my sleep gets worse and worse. So I'm kind of pissed off right now, and I've been pissed off for years about this. We have education. Now, people are always talking about educational. We need to do something practical, like how to balance a budget, a household budget, or learning how to do your taxes, or practical skills so you can make money. Yeah, sure, why not? What about the most relevant stuff? What we fucking are, human apes, animals. They don't teach us about evolutionary. I'm not saying you have to fucking become a primatologist here,
Right.
But teaching us some basic stuff apart from. So, for example, I think it's more important for general knowledge to learn about the interaction of evolutionary history, biology, sort of sociobiological behavior stuff in high school than, say, just, I don't know, cell morphology. That's important too, or molecular. You learn about that. You learn biology is, learning about cells and mitochondria and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. What's more relevant? Learn about how we evolved. Mate selection, the primacy of looks, why we have disgust reactions to certain things. Another thing, how men and women operate. What are their criteria? Well, looks are obviously the most, but women also need to invest in resources, which is why they're hypergamous. All these. I've been saying this for years, that's the type of education, at the very least in high school, people should start getting, because that's when they start getting randy and horny and also get these things become important. I've been saying this for fucking years, and, well, nobody listens, of course, because I'm a nobody, and why would they listen to me? But that would be beneficial. You're right, they're unaware. They're fucking unaware because we didn't evolve to think about things like proximate and distal cause, Well, how many times people are, morons. They say, the reason why you have sex distally ultimately is because it leads to reproductive success. No, it feels good. It's obvious. It's proof. You can, yes, but you're still missing the ultimate cause here. There's a distinction between why we do things immediately. And I mean, it's across the board. Why Doritos are fucking great. Although I haven't had them in years. I mean, they taste great, and the reason why, is because they're fat, sugar-rich food that's gonna, in theory, give you the calories you need to survive a difficult terrain or environment. And people never think that way. We This is the problem. We don't think in evolutionary terms. And if there's any lesson to be driven home about any of this, whatever the topic is, we have to think of ourselves in evolutionary terms. It doesn't matter whether you're an expert or not, or you decide to become an evolutionary biologist or not, or primatologist or whatever. You have to think of human beings in evolutionary terms. Those terms are inseparable from what we are now. It's not possible to come up with an accurate and insightful picture of human beings or the human ape if you do not know anything about evolution. And mind you, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna call them morons. I get these people. I can't believe Stardust fell for the bunk theory of evolution. My fucking god, piss off if you think that. The whatever.
It's why I think of the first Enlightenment as being kind of autistic,
Yes,
because it portrayed human beings as rational animals.
we're
And
not.
you know what? There might be a small fraction of the human race that can push rationality a lot more than the average person can, but on a larger scale, no, forget it. No, we're not rational. And the idea of having this republic where people engage in debates and settle their differences like that, that's not what's going to happen. I mean, we can see how politics actually works. But yeah, the original Enlightenment, absolutely autistic. And I mean, with the way things are going now, I can kind of look around me and say, now I understand why we had feudalism. Now I understand why we had lords and peasants.
Yeah. Now you understand. You even see even political polarities or the directions people go in. These are evolutionary adaptations. So
True,
conservatives or far right people tend to have very high disgust reaction. I mean,
Yeah.
most prominently the so-called leader Adolf Hitler was obsessed with hygiene and cleanliness, and it's no mystery why the way he denigrated people and designated people is essentially vermin. That's how he viewed them, and it was kind of a disease. On the other hand, people who follow more along the left liberal line, they tend to have more empathy. They have a lower disgust. So all this stuff is tied into how we evolved. And of course, you're going to get different phenotypes. I just cited two different political phenotypes. But if you cut out evolution from, this is my whole criticism of modern psychology. So much of it is cut off from the only thing that matters, really, is how we evolved in an ancestral environment and how maladaptive we are in the current environment with respect to the previous environment. That's really the only relevant question there is to ask. You have problems, you're depressed. Where does that all come from? Now, I'd argue that as we learn more and more about neuroscience and neuropsychology on the brain, that's going to be an important factor too. So what's lighting up there and what's not. But this sort of just really modern day approach to therapy with no background whatsoever in how we evolved is folly. And it's condemning. We could learn about this. You know how we learn the basics like algebra and basic phonics and all this stuff. And I don't want to start too early because this stuff is overwhelming. But maybe in middle school, when you're 12 or 13, you start learning about our ancestral past, what drove certain types of behaviors. Now, this is a problem I normally live and let live when it comes to religion. But the problem when you would get religious interference on that, because they don't want these things taught. Yeah, because religion is an effort to you could say it's a good faith, in air quotes, effort to sort of pretend that we're not animals, right? But it's not helping, because
I don't know if it's that or if it's that most human beings are, if you go with the skeptic idea of where God comes from, I can't remember if it's a type 1 or type 2 error, assuming human motives in the wind or in trees or in
agency.
the earth. Agency, where skeptics would say there is none. And then you take that, and then on top of that, you make a bunch of stories to impart moral knowledge or behavioral knowledge, and you do it with stories because the human mind, most people will react better to hearing a story than listening to Plato or a rational argument, comparatively. And so, if I'm with a hyper rational person, I might be able to sit them down and convince them that not murdering and robbing from your neighbor, and if we don't do that, but rather we work together cooperatively, we can all make easier lives for ourselves, where we all basically get what we want, but we might have to have some compromises here and there. Like a really intelligent, hyper-rational person, you could probably sit down with them and make logical arguments for that. But for most people, you have to tell them that the invisible Skyfather gave you 10 rules to live by, and they'll listen to that instead.
I agree. I mean, it's
like a hack on the human brain.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that fundamentally, but even so, if we're going to be teaching people things that people formerly didn't learn, I mean, even 300 years ago, you didn't go to school and learn mathematics. I mean, most people didn't even go to school. So it's time we adjusted the curriculum. It's time that we learn about And there's another problem. People do learn about evolution, but they think it only applies to fucking lemurs and frogs and well, crocodilians.
I get the impression that in the past people sort of knew this stuff, and maybe because we lived closer to the earth, where you could see the animals, and like with my cat, sometimes some of the stuff she does reminds me of the kids I went to middle school with. Maybe living on a farm or living in that kind of more natural environment, you could look at the animals and see behaviors that sort of resembled human behavior. It was, maybe people realized we were more connected to the earth than people living in cities. I'm just taking a guess here.
Well, certainly people were much. I mean, people. You could say in the past, people embody their evolutionary drives and instincts far more. Like I said, I mean, lepra would be driven out of the city. Best case scenario. Deviations from normativity, whether it's in terms of looks or psychology, were harshly punished even a century ago. I mean, look at all those freak circuses. You can see pictures online, read about the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, or people would be aghast these days if you took midgets or Peter Dinklage, who starred in Game of Thrones, right? If he were just a showpiece at a circus, and yet people like him, just like him, were assigned to those roles, and those were the only roles that they had.
Yeah.
You probably, somebody back then who was 100 pounds overweight also might be a circus ornament. So, it was just much more primal, and people just rather thoughtlessly reacted to whatever their motivations and drives were. I'll concede that. But, I mean, Darwin's theory, when he put it out there in the mid 19th century, really hit everyone hard. And, it was on. I mean, there's so much conflict there. So I don't think people drew the similarities at all. And we're still fighting we're fighting right now in this conversation. Not you and I, but drive home the point that we are just animals. And that's also the problem with, I think, the way, if people know anything about evolution, how it's taught. It's this sort of, we leave it to the academics to talk about how it impacted humans, and it's fine talking about, I don't know, Panthera, big cats, right? Or family, Canis, or that's okay. So, this wolf of all, separated from the rodent, fine, that's great. But humans? No. That's the issue. And I'd argue, in terms of rank of importance, that's what you really want to teach in high school in these environments, because that's what's relevant. I mean, it explains basically everything. It explains the things like disgust reaction. It explains why, Brad the Chad is slaying pussy and Joe the Dork isn't, because Joe the Dork has a recessive jawline and a kind of weird kind of poofy eyes or whatever. It explains everything, basically. And wouldn't that be better to just level with people? And it's because you also, in that case, wouldn't, if this were mainstream acknowledged information knowledge, you wouldn't get people like saying, "Bruh, man, have you were taking a shower? You hit the gym? Why don't you wear some khakis and a button down, man? Those shoes, man, get some nice leather shoes, bruh." Yeah, I mean, nobody would say to the guy who's 5'3" with his receding jawline or receding hair or whatever, "Bruh, man, you just gotta fucking get clean, get in the shower, man, hit the gym, you'll be alright, you'll stay some pussy."
Yeah, you're right. No one would do that.
Because it would be laughable. Nobody would take that seriously. They would just say, "Sucks, man. It really." And maybe if they were malicious, it sucks for you. But they say, "That really sucks. I'm, sorry." And you wouldn't have this conflict and this mirage. It's basically a mirage or a miasma that people have erected, where they're sort of knowingly lying to people. They say, "Well, it's your personality, bro." In some cases, there's dysfunction. But honestly, if a guy is just butt ugly, who's fat or just too short, I don't know what the threshold. Well, I think the threshold these days is ridiculous. It's like 6 feet plus, right? But I mean, there's a workable threshold, right? So if you're, I think if you're below 5'8" as a guy, you're starting to run into problems, real problems. Yeah. And if you're the real low end, 5'3", it's GG. No one's gonna fucking pretend that that would be, you got to hit the gym, bro. If you eat muscles, you'll make up for it. I mean, people do that to compensate, but still, I think that this is just something that people need to become clean about, and we'd have a lot. I don't know if we'd have harmony, but we'd have so much. Things would function better. I think we'd just move past that stage, and then maybe move into an arena where we could discuss what little improvements could be made, instead of being bogged down in what we know are just manifestly lies and deception.
You might end up with happier relationships too, because you could, besides doing the education, they could also change if they're going to say, well, if people are going to be honest and say, look, looks drives a whole lot of things, especially when it comes to mating, well, then we better have better physical education programs. Yeah. Or if you have some of the students getting fat, all right, get them a therapist because they're doing emotional eating.
Yeah.
And then you have a generation of people who are decently pretty good looking. They might have happier, more stable relationships. A lot of the current crap might go away. I don't know. Maybe being too
speculative. Well, I think there would be improvement, and that's the point. There would be some improvement.
There would be improvement. Yeah.
And that's what we want, and we're not fucking doing it, and we're still pretending that we're not animals. We're still pretending that somehow, at some point in time, our astral cord, to invoke some D&D stuff, got separated, and we were able to float free, and we're completely in the astral plane, on the astral plane, instead of still being partially connected to the prime material. This is just not. I mean, nobody thinks that who's actually a scientist or spent some time on this stuff. And this, by the way, even in academia, and this is my amateur interest, evolutionary psychology. You read publications and stuff. There's a lot of resistance. It's just so stories. Some of it is, but a lot of it is replicable. In terms of different hormone production levels, different types of activities you can test to relate to status, things like. So there's been a lot of this is kind of the second leg of the race. And people are willing to accept mostly evolution, and that we evolved. We are apes and evolved from for earlier mammalian forms, but the idea that this has impacted our behavior, and it's essentially everything when it comes to our behavior, more or less. People in academia they're still met with resistance. I mean, evolutionary psychology is regarded as something separate from mainstream psychology, which largely is kind of accumulation of learning stats and things like that. That's important. Obviously, you need to learn stats for so many different disciplines, but so there's a lot of resistance there still, and it's interesting that we're in 2019, people are still resistant to a lot of it, and so much of it is just because you don't go through life thinking about your maladaptive behavior to the modern environment. No, you don't.
I think there's another reason why too, is because most people are probably not secure enough in their looks to accept that a lot of how they're treated and what they're getting out of life is because of their looks. They'd rather believe they got what they deserved somehow. Whether they're very good looking or they're just kind of average, they don't, and it makes you realize how much more out of control your life is.
Well, we're moving. I mean, this is a totally valid topic. I mean, people don't like hearing it. They disagree with me. I think all the evidence is on my side. So you want to disagree and rail against the gods, go ahead. But we're just puppets.
Right. Yeah.
We're puppets of our environment, puppets of our genes, puppets of that's why I think willpower is a bunk. What does that mean? So on a day where I get 5 hours of sleep, I all of a sudden have willpower, but 2 hours I don't.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So that degree of variability. A day I get 5 hours of sleep, I'm hitting extra reps with 10 extra kilos on the bench, and then was it my willpower did something? I mean, it's retarded.
I see what you're getting at,
yeah. So we are just puppets at the end of the day. You can make choices, sure, and there are variables there, and you can make different choices, and so I think something people conflate is a choice with free will or free agency. Yeah. Of course, they're choices. So you can, within limitations, obviously, And so this is another really harmful idea, I think. And this is a big debate in academia amongst quote unquote philosophers. I don't know how well versed you are in literature. If not, I can just explain. Between essentially different views of the concept of quote unquote free will. Conventional notions being so called libertarian free will, not to be confused with the political philosophy, that we're sort of just free agents apart from other things. Very few people subscribe to that. But libertarian free will is the default position of most human beings. Then you get compatibilism. A guy like Dan Dennett likes to argue, where he's talking about, well, it's still us making it. It's a very vague, nebulous thing. It makes no sense to me. And then other people like Sam Harris and I forgot the name of the author. Various people. It's just kind of bunk. People like Dennett worry that if people were woke on the free will question, that everything would just disintegrate, because they're things, there's sort of consequences that arise from that. So if everyone's just a puppet, which is my view, and I think the evidence supports that, then criminals are just puppets too. Now that doesn't mean if people are dangerous, you can completely remove agency from it and still lock them away if there aren't better options. Yeah. However, and this is where it gets tricky, Monday. We're getting into sort of but it's interesting. I had lots of discussions with people. People have a deep sense of retributive justice, quote unquote, vengeance, basically. So I give a scenario, or some Sam Harris has too, although I think I came up with it simultaneously. But anyway, let's say someone's a criminal. Maybe we'll start with not too severe, right? Like maybe he's robbed a bunch of liquor stores, and he's had just whatever, and they come up with a pill that he swallows, and all of a sudden he's an upstanding citizen. Are you going to just jail him for the things he's done if there's a corrective means? Or even worse, if a person's committed heinous crimes like rape or murder,
right? And
you can correct this. I mean, the famous example that everyone talks about, Harris has probably made this popularized more than anyone, is Charles Whitman, who in the 60s, a perfectly normal guy, goes bonkers, murders his wife and his mother. They're on the same, and climbs the top of a tower.
Yeah.
And shoots people and leaves. That's right. Leaves a note and says, "Look, I can't not compel myself to do this. I gotta go crazy and shoot lots of people, but I'm leaving. I know you're gonna kill me, or I'll kill myself. So just make sure to And so here's another question: Did he have willpower, and was he a free agent before he had the tumor and then he got it? And then some people say, well, yeah, that's a concrete case, but I mean, as Sam Harris likes to say, it's tumors all the way from top to bottom at the end of the day, essentially. Every little thing influences your behavior. What if your entire day, let's say you're going to have a normal day, and someone accidentally spills scalding hot coffee on you, and you get maybe light first-degree burns, and your entire day is going to differ. Your mental architecture will be different. In my case, I know people are tired of me talking about it, as I am, but I'm tired, no pun intended, that I can notice day-to-day differences in my mental and physical performance based on the fact that I get an hour or two of extra sleep. And so you notice these things. You notice we're not free agents. We're just puppets of the universe. And that's I guess that's the bigger quote-unquote black, or maybe it's a white pill. I think it's a white pill, actually, but that if we had that understanding, then teaching things like evolution, the fact that we're just products of an evolutionary environment that interacted with our genetic genome, would be that much easier. We feel like free agents. We feel like we're in charge of what we're doing. And yet very clearly there are limits, obvious limits to people. So very few people would make the claim that, my favorite example being Olympic class sprinter, that if given sufficient training, they could be an Olympic class sprinter. Many people, and I would agree, would be like, you can improve your speed, your conditioning, sure. Because there are things in extremis that are just so far out there that only few human beings achieve them. But other things which seem to really say, don't eat as much, or don't be fat, or go to the gym. These are all just, again, claims of willpower that are just nonsensical to me. I mean, I can create a story that I can tell myself, and that's what we do. We tell ourselves narratives about why we did things when in reality we don't have a fucking clue. I mean, the famous example. I mean, name three cities. If I asked you to name three cities, Monday, which cities would you name? Just tell me three cities.
Baltimore, Chicago, New York.
Okay. Why didn't you say London or Seattle, or you don't know?
Because I don't live there.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Because I live in the United States is probably why I picked those.
Okay, fine. But why not Seattle, Los Angeles, or San Francisco? I mean,
because I spent most of my life living on the East Coast.
Okay. Yeah, and I wanted to ask about your accent, but yeah. Anyway, there were some interesting anomalies I've detected there.
Really? Like what?
Well, we're going to get off topic if I bring up certain things. You know, this is my autism.
This is kind of curious. I didn't realize. Well, first of all, I don't hear myself as having an accent. And second, it's kind of curious that you say there's anomalies in it.
Well, okay. Well, we're going. You said that you grew up in the in the Washington D.C. area.
Yeah,
yet I detect things in your accent that are more reminiscent at times of a tri-state area upbringing.
Of what kind of?
Tri-state, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, sort of thing.
New York, Pennsylvania. Huh.
Now it might be.
Interesting.
It might be. Did you grow up in the sort of more northern area? I've never. I guess it's a matter of distribution, but there's certain vowel qualities. So earlier in the conversation, I mean, this is why people find me intolerant. I find this stuff interesting. They think I'm being critical when it's just me being autistic and being the sociolinguist. But so you don't say oranges, you say oranges, right? That pronunciation.
Oh yeah.
Or the way you pronounce the vowel, I would say you say eh. So I would say vast, and you say something more akin to something like vast or something like that.
Vast.
Yeah,
something like that.
That's right. These are cues. These are very common pronunciations in the tri-state kind of super dialect or super sociolect, where it's much more exaggerated, not with you, but with these people. The sort of I'm getting flaky sandwich kind of thing. But people from New York and New Jersey and the sort of adjacent areas of Pennsylvania typically have different vowel quality that seems much more reminiscent of how you speak. So I was a bit puzzled. When I was growing up, I had that too. I used to say I think I used to say flower. I don't say that. I have not for decades. But I have a very kind of neutral English because I've just lived abroad for a long time.
Yeah, there are places.
So I say Florida, but that's or the vowel quality like and instead of and or things like that. So that's this is my autism. I have no idea how you pick this up.
No, I'm wondering how I would pick it up because
it's manifestly there though. That's the thing, and it's very odd.
Maybe it has to do with class. I mean, I was in the
there you go class instead of class you said so that's another indication. It's just pointing that out.
Yeah, okay. Instead of class.
Yeah. So
maybe growing up in the lower middle class.
Yeah, that could have something to do with it because now this won't interest people. We're moving into my interests of my future channel. I probably would cover all this stuff, but yeah, I mean there have been extensive studies and sociolinguistic studies that there's a high correlation between socioeconomic status and the type of accent you're gonna have.
Yes.
So maybe it has something to do. Yeah, because I have another friend who grew up near the DC area, and he doesn't. I mean, he's a different generation too, but he doesn't sound remotely like you. And
interesting.
So it's a bit. This is my autism. I pick up on these things, and people, you can see what fun I am at parties. But getting back on track, this phenomenon of it's essentially all tumors from the top down, and if we would come clean to ourselves about this as the first matter of priority, everything else becomes easier. Then you just teach the evolution, and we're just a bunch of apes, and we have pretty much the same limitations as other animals.
I suspect things would change too. For example, like with criminality, there is some part of the criminal population that are effectively incorrigible.
Yes.
That we have no way of changing them behaviorally. So either we could incarcerate them permanently, or now, of course, the way our justice system works, what they would say, you can't incarcerate someone for their entire lifetime based on like the findings of social science, basically. But I was thinking, America geographically is large enough that we could section off areas, and if we have someone that, behaviorally is incorrigible, that you're not going to be able to change who they are, don't imprison them, don't execute them, exile them. Set up areas where they could go live, but they have to live away from other people because they're too dangerous, because they can't stop themselves. And then you don't have to really worry about that much anymore.
Yeah, although, again, what I've noticed, which they talk about incorrigibility, that people, particularly, I think there probably is more even distribution on this, but people on the right tend to be obsessed with vengeance, or as they put it, justice. So it's not, somebody kills somebody, this person must suffer as a consequence. Forget about the tumors, it just doesn't matter, because it gives them a deep feeling of satisfaction. And you see this in other instances. There are numerous instances. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, I think the reason they go for that is because if something bad happens to your tribe and you don't retaliate, then other predatory tribes will look at you and say, hey, they're vulnerable, they won't retaliate, let's go after them. I think that's where that drive for vengeance comes from.
Well, yeah, but I think that might be true, but it also is sort of fundamental part of human psychology, because it happens with animals too. There are numerous cases. There's one case, I think it was in the early 20th century, or a circus elephant, something I wouldn't approve of because elephants are very intelligent animals. Basically treated like shit. Goes on a rampage, kills a bunch of people, and they string up the elephant and torture it to death. And they feel really good about it too.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, and I think we've all been through, even me, and I'm not a very vengeful person, phases where vindictiveness and reveling in other people's suffering for perceived slights and wrongs. I know people who would feel that they've been wronged, and they would like to see the people who perpetuated these wrongs, even though we're all these sort of puppets, right, to suffer at least in equal terms, if not more. Something that I feel myself very detached from. I don't really want to see anyone suffer, so I think that is the real issue when it comes to these things, because it's all well and good to have the education and but people, whatever the ultimate origin of it is, and you might be right, I think most people would struggle to let go of vindictiveness, vengeance, and the desire of retributive, quote-unquote, justice. And the justice system itself would have to just be reduced to some sort of...
Well, see, I was thinking if we got better with this kind of thing and were more honest with it, you might be able to pick up on this kind of stuff a lot earlier in a person's life. So long before they murdered somebody, you'd realize, okay, this person, because of genes and environment and a lot of things that happen to them, they're never going to be able to function normally in society and not be dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's why I was suggesting having, as one way of dealing with it, possibly, there's enough geography in America, you could section off areas where you say to these people, okay, you're going to live here, you can't leave, but we'll leave you alone. Exile, effectively.
Yeah, but you're always going to have some section of the population with effectively, it's usually the people with high disgust sensitivity who feel vengeful and really want to think that people like that just shouldn't exist. I mean, I don't want to get my channel, but I've met people that they talk about classes of people, and the things they say, I can't repeat them here. And, and they legitimately feel that way. And I understand from an intellectual perspective why they would. I mean, they're just wired that way psychologically. And they represent, obviously, a successful phenotype that's been with us throughout human history and prehistory. Otherwise, it wouldn't manifest itself. And so those people would never concede or condone that. I mean, I understand where that might come from, but you'd get divisions just as we get normal political divisions to this day. And for example, the death penalty. I mean, it was just kind of milquetoast stuff here, but forget about the incidence of error here, because we know it's a lot murkier or foggier, or I can't think straight. It's a lot more complex. I mean, it's there have been so many malpractices with regards to the death penalty People just think it's on principle a good thing because it's a sort of completion of justice or vengeance or whatever. People feel personally vindicated and fulfilled because of that. And most of that falls, on the typical right-left wing axis. And, I've had enough experiences both personally and just more broadly with people that you can just see this in how people interact. Some people just have very little empathy for anyone outside their in-group. And that in-group can be anything. It can be ethnic. It can be a friend circle, a circle of friends. It can be, it just these other people are just non-factors. And then some people have just, you could say, even too much, like, humanity unite types, right?
Right.
And so that solution, I think some people would say, yeah, that's a good solution, but you would get large numbers of people who phenotypically are distinct and would never approve of that. This is why for 2 years now, I've been saying that you look at the United States, you talk about, it's largely, it's a large place. And again, this is a pipe dream. You already kind of have some of this, but sort of a partitioning of the United States based on sort of essentially a psychological inclinations, or you could also call it political, but political stuff is manifestation of psychology, where people who feel a certain way about things, they can have their area of land, and other people can have theirs. And for all in this thought experiment, you could actually create new countries. So if you want, sort of liberal, empathic, blah de blah, I don't know, maybe make that the Northeast. I'm just randomly, or the North Pacific Northwest, or whatever. And you could have different areas for more conservative people, and and I suppose you would even get gradations of it, because maybe you get really, really right-wing people in some area, and then some in between, more conservative types. And this seems to be a better solution than really anything else. Then there's separate jurisdiction, really, because then there's separate countries with different people in those areas because of their psychological dispositions. This is also why people don't like hearing this, but people who are obsessed with the race don't realize that people within a quote unquote group. Well, I use the term population, which is the correct term. People within populations display varying psychological dispositions too. Right. So delimiting things in accordance with an ethnic or a racial profile is hardly a solution, because you're going to get people who vehemently disagree with each other because their genomes have informed their psychologies, and they belong to the same group still. So that's why that won't work very well. I think the psychological disposition seems to be probably the best metric for how people are going to get along in these types of situations. And this is a pipe dream, but I think that probably would be most effective, because that way, maybe people outside of, we'll call it, Liberalville or the country of United States of that would still complain about the far, quote unquote, far right people, right? But it wouldn't really affect them, because they would have their own
thing,
own thing, and other people would have their own thing. And I guess you're quite similar to me in that you're kind of just, you're not a sort of Dems in the Senate type of guy, really. I don't think you are, at least. You're more sort of, I guess you're a bit of a centrist. You just don't seem to be politically very animated.
I don't know where I'd fall on the political spectrum at this point. I mean, if you go by Jonathan Haidt's model with the moral foundations, I use 5, and liberals use only 2. But also, if you look at my psychological profile, I have that up on my website or my YouTube channel where I showed my big 5.
Yeah.
Usually, if you're high in conscientiousness, usually you'll be conservative. If you're high in openness, you'll be liberal. But I score, I think 87 conscientiousness out of 100 and 94 out of 100 in openness. So I score real high on both. So
I saw that.
And I have some people in my comment section where they were watching my channel for a while on my political channel, and they would say, "What, you're like?" They said, "I thought you were a conservative. Now you're a liberal. What's going on?" And it's that I'm really kind of neither, but I don't know where I'd.
I think you have.
That's why sometimes I joke and say I'm a monarchist.
Yeah. Well, you're all. I think it's just a manifestation of the complexity of your personality. I've never officially done a personality test, and the main reason I do is because you need to be fresh of mind, and I never am.
Oh yeah.
So my neuroticism score, I'm 90% sure would shoot up by a significant percentage just because I'm
Wow.
chronically
Yeah.
sleep deprived, and things like that. But I suspect that, well, I'm not near. I know even with sleep, I'm not as conscientious as you. But yeah, I mean, I think there's some overlap there too. I would suspect, just based on sort of other tests I've taken to varying degrees, yeah, that if you're willing to look at things in a non-binary way, that kind of makes you some kind of centrist, and that you can
Hmm.
acknowledge the different virtues. So with heights, I guess moral foundation. I'm trying to remind myself off the top. I'm too tired. There's
Oh,
do you
yeah.
remember all
Was
five of
it
them
like
off the top of your head?
loyalty,
Loyalty,
authority?
authority.
Hold on, I can look it up
Yeah,
real quick.
best to do it that way because I'm too tired to remember all of them.
Moral foundations. Jeez. Oh, it's one of the foundations is care and harm. Another is fairness and cheating. Another is loyalty, betrayal. Another is authority, subversion, and then sanctity, degradation. But it now includes a sixth parameter, liberty, oppression.
Okay, interesting.
Okay.
I guess he's adding to his model.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, where I can see things. I'm really good at acknowledging these traits in other people, and yet I just don't feel strongly. It's sort of my the earlier anecdote where I'm talking about sort of gay pride parades, and where I just kind of feel apathetic to it. I certainly wouldn't fund it myself or add to it. I don't think it's necessary, but I don't see it as something fundamentally pernicious and harmful, which a lot of the people on the right do. So I just kind of, I guess it's confusing, and it makes me a fence sitter. But I mean, here's the thing: what do you do? What do you do if your natural disposition is that of sort of observing things and taking into account all the variables? I don't know. I don't feel with a few exceptions, I don't feel a strong pull on a lot of these kind of hot topics, which I don't think are hot at all. So, for example, abortion, pragmatically, I'm pro-choice, but not because women need. No, it's because, again, historically and prehistorically, abortions have been going on forever, and if you limit access to it, you're going to create environments where they're going to be done anyway, and the women who are having the kids are going to die in the process too. I guess is that better than the alternative? It's you don't. There's no. I mean, what's happened, you can see in countries up until recently where Ireland legalized it very recently, the women would just flee. They'd go to the UK or elsewhere. So,
I mean, there are a few negative side effects of abortion, like in China, because I think it was because of the one-child
I'm not
policy.
saying there aren't. I mean, you're just
Yeah.
saying it's all. I never say that. Everything is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It's just that if you completely deny access, people are going to have the back alleys abortion. It's been going on there. It's tested in Rome, So I don't. The only pragmatic solution, at the end of the day, I guess I'm a bit of pragmatist. Yeah, maybe it offends your morals, but pragmatically, if you're concerned about lives, it's going to cost more lives to outlaw it than it is to just maintain it ultimately.
Right.
So yeah. Anyway, and that's not. I don't feel emotionally attached to it. I just look at the data and I look at the history of our species, and yeah, that's what makes the most sense to me. But I guess I also don't find myself strongly motivated by emotion on a lot of these issues. And that's something also, I guess, we talked about relatability in the beginning. I just can't relate to a lot of people's really strong attachment to certain wedge issues,
certain things,
quote unquote hot topics, and the amount of energy they put in. I meet people online all the time who are just incredibly, and it's almost admirable, energetic about one or two topics, and that's all they ever talk about. They never stop talking about it, day and night. He's like, so you go on a Discord server, you see that guy, and you don't even need to wait for him to speak because you know what he's going to be talking about because you heard him. And you might get some variation, but it inevitably drifts back to that sort of thing because these people are obsessed, and I just can't really relate to that. And they're just really, really animated about these things, and yeah, it's another reason why I don't do normies really well because I think yeah, most people tend to become really obsessed by something that really drives them, and they're not looking for balance. I mean, obviously D&D alignment is a shitty metric of real world morals and ethics, right? But I kind of get the druid, you know. I kind of get the idea of, I mean, true neutral is kind of, it's crazy, but I get the idea of, you know, it's obviously something like chaotic evil seems repugnant, and lawful evil more so, less so, depending on how you look at it. And what would be better than a freaking lawful good society? I mean, in theory. Well, I don't know, that you're going to constrain creativity in those societies because by its very nature, lawfulness has an extreme hierarchy. And so maybe I see that a lot of things have their place, and in actually the real world, not just with, you know, D&D alignment, that different views are definitely valid. They represent different aspects of human nature and psychology on a spectrum, and they wouldn't be here with us. And you wouldn't have people, you know, liberals with their views or people on the right with their views if it didn't serve some utility. So maybe that's my view, is that, you know, maybe for me, combining different ideas and being open enough to these different ideas might be the best way forward. Because, yeah, again, personality types, they wouldn't be around. For example, I'm probably much more neurotic than you are, even if I were sleeping really, I suspect. And that's really bad because it just, you know, you get worried, you worry about things, and yeah. But let's say you're totally laid back, you know, and you have some deadly disease, and you go, oh, I'm not going to worry about it. I mean,
you won't react to it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's an advantage somehow there. And people who are, you know, neurotic are more cautious and take things, you could say, more seriously. Typically, they don't just ignore things, you know. So that's an advantage. But on the other hand, it can be really crippling if you're like 90. I don't think I am, but in the 99th percentile of neuroticism.
Hope not.
I don't, to the degree that I'm functional at all. If you're in that category, even with let's say my insomnia adds, you know, 20-30% there, even so. But no, then then it's going to be crippling, and anything in extremis can be. But obviously it has utility. You wouldn't get people who are more neurotic if it didn't. You wouldn't people who are less. Low conscientiousness, I'm puzzled. You know, I'm still thinking about that because I'm compared to you, certainly, and that's one thing that I'm trying to figure out the utility of. I suppose it's I actually I'm puzzled about that one, but I'm convinced. On the conscientiousness, your high conscientiousness, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm and these are some critical differences between us. I'm assuming, since I'm never officially done, lower, significantly lower. You know, so I'm the type of guy that only cleans when things become a total mess and I can't find things anymore. You know, and you know I can't really. And maybe it's because I'm too tired. I can't divine the value of that, you know, from an evolutionary perspective. Unlike neuroticism, you know, what's the value of being lax to the point where you only start doing things when it becomes critical? Energy conservation. Boom, got it. Never mind.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Energy conservation. That's right. If you're
I
always
think depression has to do that too. Like that's part of why I think depression exists. Is it's a form of energy conservation where you just don't do something. Yeah.
Oh, that's another thing. My conscientious, I'll score. I'm almost lower because of my insomnia. I can just I have less energy. Yeah. So there you go. Energy. I wasn't thinking of energy conservation. So it all serves some function. People, at a time when you had limited access to energy, if you're constantly doing things, you're going to spend all your energy reserves. You might not survive the winter, right? So that has
exactly.
Conversely, if you're too low in conscientious, you're not going to get anything done. And you're not going to be able to plan provisionally for the future, which you need to do in environments with climatic variation, like the four seasons and more northern latitudes and that sort of thing. So it all has its place. It's just distributed very unevenly across individuals, and I would suspect to some degree populations as well. There's less evidence for that. So it's one of those things that, why not learn from it all and try to incorporate the best of everything? But that also, brings us back to the point of the starting point is the sort of tumors on the way down. We have to acknowledge that we're simply puppets of the universe, and we don't make ourselves. There's no self-made man here. We're just byproducts of all the things that were put into us, and you're just seeing the end product. Now, of course, it feels good to do something and a sense of accomplishment. And I think people can still feel that. You can still feel good for having gotten something done. Maybe you've written a book and you're done. Now, I think that's the real issue for people when it comes to this. They lose that connection.
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, it's not me anymore. Well, kind of is. And even so, it feels good. If I
mean, internally, the experience is still the same.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the whole point. So, on a given day, if I lift more at the gym or I have a good workout, it feels better than on the days where I'm just kind of slumping and not just barely getting by. And I know it has to do with factors completely out of my control, but still feels good. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's nice to hit a couple extra kilos or pounds on the weights and have more energy and whatever, or to feel more, for me, eloquent or more articulate on days where I've slept more than 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah.
I don't need to.
Speaking of that, it is past 2 a.m. my time.
That's right. The time traveler is being affected by the time paradox. Yep.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate.
But yeah, the time zone difference does suck.
It really does. I think you're 7 hours behind. But yeah, the plan. I mean, we are stopping before 4 hours, or 4+ hours. So we managed to hold true to the original intention.
Yeah.
And I don't want to screw up your sleep schedule because I know how important that is.
Yeah.
So I will, I'll thank Monday for joining me again, and mindful of the time and his time, I'll let him go enjoy his gift, as I like to call my friends
Sleep.
I have a friend who sleeps really well. I say, enjoy your gift. It's kind of a inside joke, but yeah. And I'll be posting a link to his channels because he's got 2, and so everyone, thanks for joining us. I hope this was informative or whatever, and I will check you guys out later. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.